the first days of the North Kingdom, they built a great watchtower on Weathertop. Amon Sûl, they called it. It was burned and broken, and nothing remains of it now but a tumbled ring, like a rough crown on the old hill's head. Yet, once it was tall and fair. It is told that Elendil stood there, watching for the coming of Gil-galad out of the west, in the days of the last alliance. I am guest co-host Cyril Jenkins, and you are listening to the Amon Sûl podcast.
Mahai Govanan. Welcome to Amon Sûl, a podcast for, as we say, tall hobbits with elvish aspirations, although I'm putting an asterisk on that. I'm Father Anthony, an Orthodox Christian priest, and here we talk about the works of J.R.R. Tolkien because we love them and we believe in their power to orient us toward what is highest and noblest. Today, my guest co-host is Dr. Cyril Jenkins. Dr. Jenkins was for many years both a professor and the chair of the history department at Eastern University. In recent years, he's taken on many additional projects, including a pivotal role in the establishment of the Chrysostom Academy in the Lehigh Valley. He's the director of the St. Basil Society. He's the head editor at Basilian Media and Publishing. He's co-editor-in-chief of the Rule of Faith Journal, and he's one of the most frequent guest hosts here at Amon Sûl, and he has the unique status of having actually hosted the podcast in Father Andrew's absence a number of years ago, bringing on a guest host of his own. So welcome back to the podcast, Cyril.
Father, it is my great pleasure to be here. I cannot tell you how happy I am.
Well, and you said you were really excited, too, about coming on for this episode specifically because we are talking today about Chapter 2 of the Fellowship of the Ring, The Shadow of the Past. And I have my ideas about what should be discussed on this, but I'm really looking forward to hearing why you are so excited about this chapter in particular. But I'm also just thrilled to get a chance to talk to you myself because I've been eavesdropping on your conversations with other people for years. I've been listening to your podcasts, especially Light Through the Past, which is profoundly excellent. I recommend it now to my catechumens. But now I get to talk to you myself. So,
thank you, Father. I had to make a mental note. Excuse me. You are listening to the Amon Sûl, so I didn't say you're listening to Light Through the Past, which I, say once a week, because I also have this other podcast, Path to the Academy, and there are times when I've been recording Light Through the Past, I would say Light Through the Path. Now I got to start all over, right? So anyway. But fortunately, I've learned I don't have to start over. I just have to yell at my producer, cut that out, and let's do it this way again. So
but it's always tempting, right? When you're recording a podcast and you make a mistake in the first 10 seconds, you're like, no, we're just going to redo that,
Yeah.
But,
right. Exactly.
Anyway, before we get started, we need to attend to the getting to know you questions. But you've been on the podcast so many times, I think you've answered pretty much all of them. So I was trying to be unique and ask a different question. But then I looked back at the scripts, and you may have just answered this in your first or second episode. But anyway, I'll ask again. As an educator, what is your favorite way to use or to reference Tolkien's works in the formation and education of a whole human being?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And there's so many ways it comes about. But the most absolute pedagogical way I've ever used Tolkien is I made students read his translation of Beowulf when I taught early Middle Ages, because it's not the greatest translation in the sense that Tolkien's translation is merely there to help his students as they work through Beowulf. But I love it. And one of the things that I love the most about it, as a historian, I am incredibly, how should I put this? I get distracted by footnotes all the time, and and Tolkien's endnotes to his translation of Beowulf. I just constantly was just reading that and disregarding the text all the time. But I had my students read it, and all of a sudden, my students realized, not only through reading Beowulf, but then reading through some of the Viking sagas I had them read as well, how much Tolkien leaned on these old tales in constructing everything that he had done. And I think also when I started my freshman in Western Civ, which for us was a great books course. And the first thing I would do on the first day of class is I would give them that quote from chapter 3 about be careful, where you put your feet, because you never know where the path will take you. And this is what's happening when you start reading old books. So, yes. Yeah.
I like that answer. I've known other people who seem to have tried to write a story that overtly tries to open the door to the past, open the door to literature and to a life of the mind, to a liberal education, however you want to frame that. But in other cases, I'm not going to name names, it seems far too contrived. But Tolkien does it so naturally. He makes the story something that is desirable to read and engage in on it for its own sake. And then it's only much, much later that you realize what it's done to you, how it's formed you, which is a dangerous thing, a profound power that the storytelling has over the human being. But it feels that when you're in Tolkien's hands, you're in safe hands. Although safe is that's a complicated word to use, talking about one of the Inklings. But
right, and I mean, and just for this chapter, having read The Hobbit, and then being told, oh, there's these other books, and opening it up, and I mean, we'll get into this further, but chapter 1 is very much like The Hobbit, right? It's not the child book that The Hobbit was,
right?
But at the same time, then when you get into chapter 2, all of a sudden your eyes are open to everything that was behind The Hobbit that you had never seen, and now suddenly you're let in on the secret,
right?
And it's really what sucked me in, as it were. And yes.
Yeah, because I just read the chapter 1 with Dr. Brad Berzer. I was struck both by what you say there, that it really is written, as a continuation of The Hobbit, has that child's, that children's character to it, but all the seeds are still planted there, and it's remarkable to me how he does. Anyway, we could go on about that, but
yeah. Yeah, we could go on a long time,
and I think we will.
Yes.
But first, we probably should move on to our listener questions and comments. So, this is a complicated one for me because none of these listener questions and comments are addressed to me, which is fine. I'm really just a placeholder in this, even if I, God willing, hold the place for years. But this is an email that the podcast received in April of this year from listener Holly. So this was in mid-April. And she writes, "Hello, I'm partway through episode 100, and I had to take a pause to compose this email because Richard's rant about adverbs got me thinking about too many things. I actually have a degree in writing," she says, "and since graduation I've spent hours upon hours listening to writing podcasts and reading the most popular writing books. I say this not to brag, but to establish that I am very much steeped in the modern idea of what makes good writing. It's interesting because in these kinds of settings you hear much the same advice pretty much all the time, including the advice to prioritize nouns and verbs over adjectives and adverbs. Which is funny because then I go and read classics, and these great writers go around throwing adjectives and adverbs everywhere. While I largely agree with what I was taught, I always found it interesting how different modern writing is from old writing. I often wonder why. Is writing like science that the human race constantly refines and progresses? I'm going to put progresses in scare quotes, but that's me editorializing. Were the things I was taught valid, timeless tactics, or are they unique to our culture? I'm guessing there's a bit of both involved, although the longer I spend engaging with Orthodox Christianity and podcasts like yours, the more suspicious I am of, well, pretty much everything modern. Amon Sûl et al. Has filled this void for me that I always kind of knew was missing from my education, even if I couldn't put my finger on what it was. For that, I am immensely thankful. I am more convinced than ever that I could possess all the most refined writing skills espoused by the greatest modern authors, and if I have no sense of the transcendence, of symbolism and meaning in liturgy, my work won't amount to much. I will be very interested in hearing your take on this, on why writing conventions change, and how much of that is real improvement, and how much is culture-specific. Thank you for all you do, and she signs off in Christ, Holly. Now, I have no business commenting on writing conventions, Cyril, so this is a very blatant, I'm going to hand this off to someone with an actual advanced degree and ask your opinion on this, although I have thoughts.
Oh, I have many, many thoughts on this, and because so there's a couple different things here. So most people know or are aware of the convention that you should never end your sentences with a preposition, and this largely arises from Samuel Johnson, and Johnson, who basically thought English should act more like Latin, because in Latin you can't have a preposition without a noun or an adjective following it.
Right.
And so, he does this, and it's part of the classicist movement. And so there's this whole emphasis in Johnson in that time in the 18th century to make English a very structured language.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Latin, in which they were all steeped, as well as Greek, they're full of adverbs. And the Latins have all these adverbs, even though they have a whole case, which is largely adverbial, the ablative. Oh, no, we still have to have adverbs. And so, we have all these things. And then you get into the 20th century, and the adverbs are still strongly there. So a book I made my students read when I taught historiography was by a historian named Jacques Barzoun, who taught at Columbia, and a masterful writer. He wrote a lot on writing, but his book was called, now suddenly the titles just jumped out of my mind, Clear and Direct, A Rhetoric for Writers.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes on and on about proper use of adverbs, but that adverbs also, and I think this is part of the problem, adverbs can be used in a most flabby way. People overuse really, very, truly, surely. And if we don't go back and say, all right, do I absolutely need this adverb? Does it serve? And it's basically the writer's craft. Does the adverb serve a purpose that makes it more integral to what you're trying to say than how any other way you would say it?
Sure.
And so I'm not a big proponent of modern writing, and I think that the well-wrought adverb is absolutely necessary. And so therefore I'm someone who likes adverbs, but I don't find myself absolutely dependent on them to use an adverb. And I like using adverbs that most people neglect. I like using however as an adverb, however much other people don't like using it.
Oh, that's very nice.
So, yeah. So I look to these things because ultimately writing is euphony. Does it sound well to the ear?
Right.
And when we come away from our writing, and I tell my students, keep writing journals, write every day, because if you don't write every day, you actually will start losing it. It's like your Latin, it's like your piano skills, it's all these other things that are so necessary. if you don't do it, you become rusty, you become flabby.
Yeah.
I just saw this a note the other day about a student having an interview. The student was from Stanford, and the student had trouble grasping for words. And he says, yes, he says, I've fallen into a dreadful habit of letting AI finish my sentences for me.
Oh, my word.
And he says, yeah. And he says, it's great because it knows where I'm going and what I'm doing. The only problem is, now that I'm having a conversation with you, I'm grasping for the most simple words. Yeah. So, yeah.
And
so,
and that takes
yes, go ahead.
that takes the conversation in a totally different way. But yes, this strange 30-year relationship that we have as human beings with technology, and I remember as a teenager, because I'm a little younger than you. I remember as a teenager first getting a typewriter, getting a keyboard, getting a computer, getting an internet connection, and on AOL Instant Messenger starting to communicate. And I was homeschooled, so I didn't have a lot of friends. That was my social outlet, and we started using all of the abbreviations, the LOL, and I started seeing my peers not capitalize, not punctuate, and I remember the decision that I made. Like, no, I need to keep doing this, because if I don't do it right here, I'm gonna start being lazy elsewhere. But I don't know if that's so much a moral, so much a matter of righteousness as much as it is obsessiveness. But regardless, but something about that relationship.
Yeah.
If we let the machines make it easier, like they can, then we become invidiated. Is that the word I'm looking for? Invitiated. Anyway.
Yeah, there's shameless plug time. So I have, so was just produced.
Shift it a little bit over in front of your face,
months.
because we can't quite see it on the camera.
Yep, there we are. Yes. Are we all cyborgs now? We actually went back and forth about, how are we going to do this with the title, because it was originally, we are all cyborgs now.
Mm-hmm.
But we actually want to put it, no, we're not. In fact, we'll never actually be cyborgs. We will just become lost in the machine ourselves.
Yeah.
And so it's Basilian Media and Publishing, and it's on sale now. Now I have to extend the sale because this isn't coming out to the 25th of January. So anyway, so for an extended, or you can write me and I will send you the book. Anyway, So part of this goes back. I had a professor, he was on my doctoral committee, a brilliant scholar named Donald Kelly. Mm-hmm. Kelly just wrote massive amounts of stuff on historiography, on the French Renaissance. He was just a brilliant scholar. And he told me, he said, I refuse to think of emails as real letters or real literature. I want to save my writing for other things. And therefore, I purposely made it a point not to edit my emails. These things are trite and trash, and that's how I'm going to treat them, because the things that are really important are the real letters I write, the real manuscripts I work on. And if I start treating emails as things other than just the quickest, tersest things, he says, then I'm, I won't fall into bad conventions, is how he thought about it.
Interesting.
I don't know if that was a bad convention, but I've always thought about this when I go back. Wait, did I say this right in my email? But we become so hung up in the medium that suddenly it somehow seems to be becoming the message.
Right. That's a fascinating.
Yeah.
It's a different place to draw the boundary, because for me, again, I grew up in this digital age, although I have a memory of a somewhat analog childhood. And for me, the line was, I have to treat this as real. I have to treat this as something deserving of my time and effort, or else I will devalue it. But but I never learned the discipline of writing something out by hand. That was never a part of my formation.
Yeah.
Despite my mother's best efforts, I should hasten to add. But I can see that if
Yeah.
someone had grown up, had composing by hand, actually laboring over multiple drafts, refusing to apply those same disciplines to email and just keeping it short, limited, effectively like a text message. Yes, no, and when are we meeting in person to actually talk?
Exactly.
But all of it,
No, I mean,
whether my
yeah,
response or his, kind of reflects that instinctive consciousness that we are in danger of being consumed by the machine in some sense.
yeah,
And
yeah,
wow.
yeah. It very much is. And I mean, there's another whole podcast there, Father. Once you finally make your way through the Lord of the Rings, you can probably have several podcasts on Tolkien and technology
Mm-hmm.
just by itself. I mean, it really is. And I mean, I'd love to have one just on um, the Inklings as a long standing conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this is something really lost, which I think technology does. It short circuits our ability
Mm.
to have long, extended conversations.
Yeah.
And to me, they're so fundamental.
Actually, one of my intents for this is that we'll take pauses as we go through the chapters, every 3 or 4 chapters, depending on when things make sense, to reflect on one of the more thematic elements. I would love to have you back at some point to talk about, again, Tolkien and technology and all of those things.
Mm,
I could see that making sense as we leave the Shire. I could certainly see that making sense as we get into the approach to Isengard and the mind the mind of Saruman that's become all about machines. But at some point,
right.
I would love to have you back and talk about that a lot more. But
Oh, I'd be happy to.
so the second reason that I picked this particular, because we were talking about Holly's very kind email, but she got me
Yes.
thinking about adverbs specifically in this chapter, because of course I read this and then I had to say, okay, well, how many adverbs how do we see Tolkien using adverbs? And I didn't analyze the whole chapter because Gandalf does something completely different, and in mostly the Shadow of the Past is Gandalf talking, but just the brief piece that we get with Sam at the Green Dragon Inn. That's only a page, maybe 2 pages of text. That was easy enough to analyze. And it was really interesting. Tolkien is, in that passage, quite judicious about his use of adverbs. But when he uses them in that passage, almost all of them are used to describe Sam. So that by the end of these 2 pages, we've received subtly, but easy enough to identify if we just look for the adverbs, a substantial characterization of this, our favorite gardener. So the adverbs that are applied to him are sadly, solemnly, thoughtfully, deeply, softly, and then once again, thoughtfully. Meanwhile, the only other adverb in the passage is applied to Ted Sandyman, and he only gets one, noisily. I wish I'd recognized this the first time I read the book, because I for a long time I thought of Sam as kind of a throwaway character. Oh, he's just the guy that's going along with
Hmm.
Frodo. And on my first read through, I think I was surprised that he turned out to be rather heroic, and in fact that
Right.
actually the main character. But if I paid attention, which I wasn't really, I was 12, however old I was, I would have realized this is a lot more characterization than we get about Frodo. The stuff that we get
Yeah.
about Sam, it gives us a sense of his mind, his thought, his person, and these are great adverbs.
It really is. And there's a bit more, I would say, working class Englishman about Sam than about Frodo, who's kind of, an upper middle class type individual. He lives in a nice home. He seemingly is living off of the inheritance of Bilbo to some extent. But, Sam is someone with his fingers in the dirt.
Right.
And at the same time, there's this real characterization of him here, as you say, of a profound character. And so we meet him because when he next enters into it, which we'll get to at the very end, is when, Gandalf catches him. He's a complete yes. He's completely overwhelmed. Don't let him turn me into something dreadful. And it's like, oh, I get to go see elves. I'll get to go with Mr. Frodo. And then he just bursts into tears.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it is just a beautiful, beautiful way to end the chapter. And so I think that, so much is put into crafting, right, as you put these adverbs about Sam. And then the one for Ted Sandyman, that's all it needs to say. He is someone who is, in a sense, thoughtless, boisterous. He's completely to use a phrase, a Twitter addict, probably. He can't hold a thought in his head other than to be snarky and snide. And I mean, I don't remember my first thought about Ted Sandyman reading this. I just knew, of course, as Tolkien wanted, we're not supposed to like him. We're not supposed to emulate him, right? We're supposed to be Sam, right?
Yes. Yes, indeed. Very good. All right. Well, Holly, thank you for that email. We appreciate it. I'm looking forward still to the first piece of email that is actually addressed to me, but that's okay. We've got a backlog, so don't worry too much about it. At any rate, that's all we've got for questions and comments today. But please feel free to send more to us, to me, at Amon Sûl at ancientfaith.com, or you can message us via the Facebook page. And you might hear it on an episode to come, although again, it might be a while. So, this brings us to the main portion of our episode today. I've asked Dr. Jenkins to come on the podcast to talk about the second chapter of the Fellowship of the Ring, The Shadow of the Past. If you've not read this recently, I'll urge you all to pause and reread the chapter before you continue. But if you prefer not to, we will sum up the basic shape of the chapter before we start our conversation. This is my outline. I submit it to Dr. Jenkins for a grade, and he can tell me how I do. So, we have three parts here. Part one is kind of the aftermath of the party. It establishes Frodo as the Master of Bag End and sums up the 17 years before his 33rd and his 50th birthday. And then it describes the trouble in the world. It gives us our first mention of Mordor, and it talks about orcs and trolls and other terrible creatures proliferating. Part 2 introduces Sam and gives us this scene at the Green Dragon. So Sam is thoughtful and loyal, and he yearns to see elves. Ted Sandyman, the miller's son, is a jerk. Sam defends Frodo and Bilbo at the inn, and he defends Frodo and Bilbo and elves and beauty to Ted. And then he goes home. And Gandalf arrives that same evening, although the precise nature of the coincidence that it actually is the same evening, I say it's veiled in my outline, but actually I just read over it and missed it the first few times until the very end of the chapter. Part 3, and the most substantial part of the chapter then, is what I summarize as the Silmarillion comes to the Shire. So Gandalf arrives and fills Frodo in about Sauron and about Frodo's ring, tells him that the ring is dangerous and will possess its possessor. Frodo seems concerned, but not really emotionally invested. Gandalf proceeds to sum up the making of the Rings of Power, Bilbo's acquisition of the ring, and how Gandalf had to push Bilbo for the true story of how he got it. Gandalf then talks about how he searched for the history of Bilbo's ring, and then he performs the test by throwing it in the fire, which reveals the fiery letters which he reads. He then gives the larger history of the Rings of Power, about Sauron and Mordor, the 3, the 7, the 9 rings, and the ruling ring, how the ring was taken from Sauron, lost in Anduin, was found by Deagol, the Steward, taken by Smeagol, taken under the mountains, and then he reveals that Smeagol is in fact Gollum. Gandalf then discusses with Frodo the riddle game, because Frodo is horrified at the idea that Gollum could be a hobbit, but Gandalf says that it's actually not that surprising. Then he says Bilbo was meant to find the ring and not by its maker, one of the more important hidden sentences of the whole chapter, of the whole book. Frodo doesn't understand. Gandalf then summarizes his search for Gollum, reveals that Gollum has been to Mordor, has told the enemy about the Shire and hobbits and Baggins. Frodo is shocked and horrified, wishes Bilbo had killed Gollum. Gandalf corrects him, and then they discuss how to destroy the ring. Frodo offers the ring to Gandalf, who refuses it. Frodo agrees then to leave the Shire, carrying the ring himself to find a solution. Sam is caught eavesdropping and is then assigned to accompany Frodo. So, I thought about naming this chapter that the Silmarillion comes to the Shire, or this episode, and I think we will. The Silmarillion comes to the Shire because of the amount of backstory Tolkien crams into this chapter. I think that's one of the two things that springs to my mind about this. It's an extremely unconventional way in which the book begins, because in chapter 1 we had the humorous and charming unexpected party, full of silliness and the comfort of the Shire, and then all of a sudden we get this chapter dropped on our heads, which retcons and problematizes the whole story of The Hobbit and raises the curtain on a much darker and complex reality behind the charming parochiality of the Shire, so that by the time this chapter ends, we know we're in for quite a ride. But then the other thing I notice, in the midst of this, we have several characters presented to us, each of them engaging with that dark backstory, and specifically with the ring itself in several different ways that reveal quite effectively the thoughts and intents of their heart. So I'm hoping that as we go through this, Cyril, we can talk about that formation of the soul, the maturity, the healthiness of our different characters, of Bilbo and Frodo and Sam, of Ted Sandyman, of Gandalf and Gollum, and perhaps even Sauron. So those were kind of my two big points. What do you see in this? What are your thoughts before we actually get into the text?
Yeah, before we get into it, so I do like the way that you put this, right? We have these very disjointed chapters, as it were, where we have this transition, the long-awaited party, Bilbo front and center, and I still remember years and years, in the 70s, I had read The Hobbit, and then I started reading, even before I got to it, I had started reading The Lord of the Rings. But before I even done that, my brother had, he was a Baptist minister, and he took a church down in San Angelo, Texas.
Okay.
And in San Angelo, Texas, they actually had a store called Frodo Baggins.
Okay.
I guess this was before the state could catch up with them and make them change the name. But Frodo Baggins. And my sister-in-law said, "Oh, you read The Hobbit. You need to read this." And I said, "Well, who's Frodo Baggins?" And, "Oh, he's Bilbo's nephew. He's the hero of the second story." I'm like, "Oh, I want Bilbo to be the hero." But we get to it, and of course, there's a reason Bilbo can't be the hero.
Yeah.
And the reason he can't be the hero is actually told to us in the second chapter, because the ring was starting to possess him.
Mm-hmm.
And even though, right as we're told, he took it in a moment of virtue, like he acted mercifully, he acted in a very unring-like way. And this is what preserved him. But we only find this out right in the second chapter.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it's like, at one point, he's like tearing the fabric of the whole story apart, while at the same time showing us he's actually not doing that at all. He's actually showing us the picture we don't see. And so it's just some great writing. And it's great writing in the sense not just of he's such a great wordsmith, but that he has this enormous idea of how to weave this. And of course, it's ideas he's been working with for decades. And so I love all that. And I love too the idea about the formation of character, which to me is what my job is as an educator. In the end, it's building the type of character of people who want to learn and want to read and want to discover. it's incredibly hard to make curious students. Most of us are not born that way. We're not cats. And because we learn fairly early on, I think, we can get our hands burned really quickly. So we kind of, in some ways, crush our curiosity. And modern education crushes any curiosity of students, unless you're interested in popular mechanics. Otherwise, don't be interested. And so when we look at these characters, and I mean, there's just so much here, how if your character is not formed properly, and this is something I've spent years thinking about this, because I think about my students, how easily they're distracted. I think about myself, how easily I'm distracted. This is a flaw of character, and making yourself, and this is one of the things that I think history has helped with me. And it's one of the things that I like writing about the students that I want to recommend to good graduate programs.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I will include, if I know it's true of them, is they can be bored out of their mind and they will keep on reading. That's actually a virtue. That it doesn't matter, right? I put my hand to the plow. I'm not going to turn back. And it's and it's something that says about Frodo and Sam, but also Gandalf, that they're taking up this task, and it says something about their character. It says something, Frodo ultimately stumbles at the end. I'm giving the whole thing away, I know, but stumbles at the end. And, but it's like there's only so far you can go. In a sense, I'm kind of reminded of Rod Dreher and his exit out of the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
He was told, when he started investigating the sex scandal, he was told by a priest, this could destroy your faith, what you're getting ready to do. And in the end, it didn't destroy Rod's faith. It destroyed his Catholicism, but it didn't destroy his faith. And in a sense, Bilbo, the ring is destroying him at the end. And, but he still had to strengthen the virtue to get it to Mordor. So that's my 2 cents at the moment. Right. I have many more cents had, but yes.
Well, and that's why we're here. I really like what you say about tearing the story apart, but actually not tearing it apart, but using that to reveal what's actually happening. Both because, as you say, it's a brilliant, in a literary sense, as a writer, it's a brilliant, it's brilliantly done. But this is the same thing that is very true to life, because we always see people behaving and acting in a certain way, especially as relates to us. Oh, he was rude to me. Oh, he said something unkind to me. He must not like me. It must be something that I did. And generally, it has nothing to do with that. There's something much deeper, hidden and concealed from us. It's a matter of personal struggles, of sin and repentance, and of that grand drama that goes on in the human heart of every one of us, unseen, except for occasionally when it's revealed and brought out. Well, let's get on to the text. Or rather, before we get to the actual text, I want to begin by looking at the very first draft of this chapter, which is found in the History of Middle-earth, in the volume that's called The Return of the Shadow. I forget which number it is, 6, I think, volume 6. But this chapter was originally written in the form of a potential alternate beginning to the book, replacing a long-expected party, which is a crazy thing to imagine. You open up the Fellowship of the Ring and it starts like this. So I think many people know that as Tolkien was beginning to write the requested sequel to The Hobbit, he was himself surprised by the appearance of the Black Rider as his hero left the Shire. I say his hero because the name of that hero was not Frodo at the time. Only with the arrival of the Black Riders, though, did he begin to recognize the significance of the ring, and at that point he seems to have written a conversation between Gandalf and Bingo, the figure who eventually becomes Frodo. In the second stage of writing, so after what we're going to read, Tolkien decided to retain the long-expected party as the first chapter, and then reframed that, what we're about to read, as a chapter called Ancient History, which in its basic shape and character and most of its details is the chapter we now have as The Shadow of the Past. But the original text, untitled, is worth reading aloud here, as it's something I'm guessing most of our listeners haven't ever heard or seen. Would you read this aloud, Cyril?
Certainly. One day long ago, two people were sitting talking in a small room. One was a wizard, and the other was a hobbit. And the room was the sitting room of the comfortable and well-furnished hobbit hole known as Bag End, under Hill, on the outskirts of Hobbiton, in the middle of the Shire. The wizard was, of course, Gandalf, and he looked much the same as he had always done, though 90 years and more had gone by since he last came into any story that is now remembered. The hobbit was Bingo Balder Baggins, the nephew, or really first cousin once removed, of old Bilbo Baggins and his adopted heir. Bilbo had quietly disappeared many years before, but he was not forgotten in Hobbiton.
So I have to ask, have you ever read this before, Cyril?
No. I mean, other than in the show notes, I have not read it before. I've looked at all these things at various. I have all of these, and like so many other books, like all these books behind me. These are three of like 15 other bookcases that are in and around. Umberto Eco, who wrote The Name of the Rose, said that an enormous library is an evidence of immortality, the soul reaching for that time when you shall have absolute leisure just to read. So anyway, my soul is still longing, yes. But so
Oh,
I have
yes,
lots of
indeed.
them, and there's lots I've read out of them, like particularly of the Silmarillion. Like I remember reading the earliest draft that we still possess of Tolkien's The Fall of Gondolin,
Right,
and
right.
that was like one of the earliest things he wrote, and then just think, wait, this is where it all began. And
Right.
yeah, so anyway, but I've not read that before, other than reading through the show notes here. So yes.
Yeah. I find it's rough, but you can see him. You can almost see him like, okay, I tried the unexpected party thing. That's almost too silly. Let's get rid of that. If we're gonna
Yeah.
have to talk about the serious stuff, maybe we just go right into that. And I'm glad he didn't make that choice. I think
Yeah.
it's much better the way that it's done. But it's beautiful to see the process. Okay, what would a straight path look like to the story that apparently I'm going to be telling? Well, once upon a time, the two people were sitting in a room,
Yeah.
and and this is where the room was, and uh, it, it's charming and rough but fascinating.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, it is. And there's a I just thought of this now. There's a dreadful man named Denis Diderot, and he was a French philosopher. He was a contemporary of Voltaire, knew
mhm.
Voltaire. If it can be believed, he's more dreadful than Voltaire. And he is actually the first one that we know of that we can think of as an atheist in the modern
Mhm.
sense.
Right.
Voltaire always struggled with this question, but Diderot was in your face about it. And his most well known atheist tract is called D'Alembert's Dream. And
Hmm.
D'Alembert was a deist. And the whole thing begins like you're just dropped into the middle of their conversation over dinner. And it's like, it's such a strange start, but it's also amazing. It's like you've suddenly
Right.
stumbled into this conversation. You quickly figure out what they're talking about, and it just lays the whole contours for the rest of the book. And that was done in an incredibly effective way, because I'm looking at what I just read, and it's just like that is not at all what Diderot did, right? It's just like I've got to get this started, but then it's like, nah, let's do it a different way, which we're all happy he did. So
Absolutely. So, of course, that's the original idea of how the chapter and the book might begin. But in the published fellowship, we have this instead, beginning with a commentary on Bilbo's remarkable disappearance. So I'll read this bit. The talk did not die down in 9 or even 99 days. The second disappearance of Mr. Bilbo Baggins was discussed in Hobbiton and indeed all over the Shire for a year and a day, and was remembered much longer than that. It became a fireside story for young hobbits, and eventually Mad Baggins, who used to vanish with a bang and a flash and reappear with bags of jewels and gold, became a favorite character of legend and lived on long after all the true events were forgotten.
yeah,
It draws you in so much more
right,
this way, and basic you can almost see in conversation, like, okay, if I went the straight path to just the conversation that is the lore dump, then we miss Bilbo's grand exit from the main stage. We miss the stories. We miss this reference to myth as it passes on. We miss all of this. So
yes,
we're going to laugh together first, and then we'll get serious.
right, right. And I think even going back to chapter 1, the whole struggle, right, which forms part of it, the whole struggle of Bilbo to give up the ring, right? I mean, I think that is supremely important as everything unfolds. Yeah.
Yeah, it's vital, and we'll see Gandalf talk about that in a moment.
Yes.
So let's move forward. So we get a description of Frodo's personality, how he visits the elves, and then the sinister statement that he's not aging at all, even as he approaches 50. But as he continues unchanged, the world is changing. So would you read this next passage, Cyril? This is a longer one.
Certainly. There were rumors of strange things happening in the world outside, and as Gandalf had not at that time appeared or sent any message for several years, Frodo gathered all the news he could. Elves, who seldom walked in the Shire, could now be seen passing westward through the woods in the evening, passing and not returning. But they were leaving Middle-earth and were no longer concerned with its troubles. There were, however, dwarves on the road in unusual numbers. The ancient east-west road ran through the Shire to its end at the Grey Havens, and dwarves had always used it on their way to their mines in the Blue Mountains. They were the hobbits' chief source of news from distant parts, if they wanted any. As a rule, dwarves said little, and hobbits asked no more. But now Frodo often met strange dwarves of far countries seeking refuge in the west. They were troubled, and some spoke in whispers of the enemy and of the land of Mordor. That name the hobbits only knew in legends of the dark past, like a shadow in the background of their memories. But it was ominous and disquieting. It seemed that the evil power in Mirkwood had been driven out by the White Council only to reappear in greater strength in the old strongholds of Mordor. The Dark Tower had been rebuilt, it was said. From there, the power was spreading far and wide, and away far east and south there were wars and growing fear. Orcs were multiplying again in the mountains. Trolls were abroad, no longer dull-witted, but cunning and armed with dreadful weapons. And there were murmured hints of creatures.
And that's my fault. Of creatures even worse than this, I think, is how it ends. So that is my fault in my my preparation. But I want to let you have the first word on all of this, and then I'll say what I noticed. But
Yeah. So I noticed first and foremost, of course, the passing of the elves, right? That this is a continual thing. It it appears repeatedly throughout our text. And so that was one of the things. The other thing, excuse me, the other thing was the notion of getting news from dwarves who
Mm.
apparently didn't like to talk, and the hobbits didn't want to press them. Apparently, because the news was so upsetting, right? We
Mm.
don't want to hear about it. We put our hands over our ears. And I thought also, particularly the dwarves, that this is an interesting thing that 200 years ago, everybody were hobbits. They grew up,
Mm.
lived, and died pretty much in the same town. News
Right.
came by way of traveling merchants, craftsmen, or soldiers returning from war. This was how people got news. And the invention of the telegraph changed that a bit. But this was a lot of life, and this was how news came and went, filtered through people many times running from their problems. And this is clearly what we see about the dwarves. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, wars and rumors of wars, as it were. This
Yeah.
is what's happening. And but also we're introduced because I think this is the first time orcs are mentioned, because they're never called orcs in The Hobbit. They're all trolls and goblins.
Right.
And so, this is the first time we get them. Um, a a word in ancient European literature right there.
Right.
In Latin, it meant the land of the dead. In Northern language, it actually had to do with trolls. So a bit
Mm-hmm.
different. But yes, yes.
Right.
So those were my thoughts.
Right. And that use of orc versus goblin really seems to characterize Tolkien's, shift that, that this is I don't I don't think he called them goblins in the Silmarillion. That seems to be
Mm,
the word he used in The Hobbit. But I
yes.
don't know about I don't remember about the earlier drafts of the Silmarillion, if he was
Mm,
going back and forth. But regardless, certainly within the published Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, goblin seems to be the word used for children. For a book that's intended for children, and an orc is that, okay, this is what's actually going on. This is a monster, and we're demonstrifying somewhat for children, maybe, or making it not too
yes.
scary. But orcs are terrifying, and trolls are worse. And there's those creatures that are, again. I should pull up. I should grab my actual physical copy here. But this is clearly a reference to the ring wraiths, to the Nazgul,
Yes.
wandering
Yes.
around. I
Yeah.
was
I mean,
struck by the. Sorry, go ahead.
oh, no, no. I was just going to say right there in that last sentence, murmured hints.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's so elusive. What are you talking about? Right. And
Right.
yeah, it's very let's say a cagey way of saying what's going
Mm-hmm.
on here. Right.
He sort of is like tickling the fancy several times here. There's more going on, and this is a little. It's I guess it's foreshadowing, but he's saying, the invitation to wonder what else is going on, to look for the answer. Um,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
and then we get an answer with that. There are questions that he teases that we don't get answers to, like, where far away are the dwarves coming from?
Right.
Presumably this is not from Erebor, not from the Lonely Mountain, because they're secure and safe. And
Yes.
but that's the only dwarven kingdom that we ever really see. We don't even know of a dwarvish kingdom elsewhere in the Misty Mountains, or in the mountains of Gondor. So presumably this is from further to the east. This is from the lands that are under, the domination of Mordor. But we never hear anything more about it,
Yeah.
which is in I guess kind of sad.
Yeah.
And what
Yeah. I
you
mean,
what you
it's
mentioned about the elves leaving, that's a theme I'd love to talk more about with you, and then in an ongoing way, because, Well, I said I want to put an asterisk next to that standard introduction to the podcast. Tall hobbits with elvish aspirations, because I'm not sure that human beings should be aspiring to be elves. I think there's an issue with that, depending on what stage of maturity the elves are in, I guess. But these elves at least have learned to renounce possessing things, to let
Mm,
go of ownership and even of being the main characters. And maybe that is the right way of understanding that if we have elvish aspirations, we are seeking to learn to die,
yeah.
and to take on that remembrance of death, as the elves do. But we see a lot of other stuff from the elves, and it's not unproblematic.
Yeah. And of course we don't get the real problem with the elves for some time, right? I
Right.
mean, it's just, oh, they're leaving Middle Earth, and it's like, well, why were they in Middle Earth to begin with? And
Mm-hmm.
of course some had never left, and but many of them hadn't come back. Well, why? What's going on here? And we only get hints about this
Yeah.
throughout the Lord of the Rings. And I mean, the biggest part is when Aragorn, I think it's in A Knife in the Dark, starts laying out right the whole tale of Beren and Luthien. That we
Right.
only get some sort of hint that there's some immense thing that's happened, which and even the intro, the last alliance, Elendil and
Yeah.
Gilgalad, and
Right.
it's just like there's so much more here. What's going on?
Right.
And here are the elves. And but going to your point, most of the elves that are there in Middle Earth are there, especially the ones we meet, are there for the wrong reasons, particularly
Right.
Galadriel. And you
That's
know,
right.
I mean, they all had to learn. I mean, she is really banished,
Yeah.
and it's only the outcome of everything we're reading about that, in a sense, redeems her. That she did not. She wanted power. I realize this is
Right.
getting way ahead of things. She wanted power,
Yeah.
and then when it came to her, she renounced it. And it's at that
Right.
moment she realized, I can go home,
Yes.
right? So,
Exactly. Uh, and we probably should move on, because if we
yeah,
keep talking, we're going to just talk about the whole book and forget about where we actually are. But we do have a nice basic characterization of at least elves and dwarves. We
mm-hmm,
don't see much about men here,
mm,
but elves are the ones who are leaving; they are passing away, and dwarves are fleeing, but they're looking for a place to, you know, they're going to their mines. So dwarves mine, but we already know that before.
yes,
And hobbits don't want to hear about any of it except for Frodo, who is asking for news.
yes,
And
yes,
and and that there is a lot of news is not a good thing. so
right,
so after that, we get to be flies on the wall in the Green Dragon, as Sam speaks about what rumors he has heard of all these troubles outside, and no one else wants to talk about it. And so he's arguing with Ted Sandyman, who's criticizing the rumors themselves, and also throwing into the bargain criticisms and mockery of Frodo and Bilbo and elves. And we see Sam show his stalwart character in the face of all this. We won't read much of this, but I found this line striking. This is Sam talking about the elves. They are sailing, sailing, sailing over the sea. They are going into the west and leaving us, said Sam, half chanting the words, shaking his head sadly and solemnly. But Ted laughed. So we see there the two of those adverbs, and the characterization is very clear, even in this short snippet.
mm. Yeah. I really like the thing about half chanting the words, that
Yeah.
there's this, and because we get this, that Sam is, if he's not a poet, he's someone who appreciates the poetic in life, right? Because
Yes.
the whole lay of Gilgalad, he's the one. Again, this is in another chapter, but he's the one reciting this, right? They
Yeah.
they they turn around, they're like, Sam, what are you doing? And but Sam shows himself to be so much more than, the mere gardener. And
Right.
I mean, in a sense, it's kind of laying the foundation, and we should all see it as it plays out about how heroic he is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he's what's the best way to put this? I think he's kind of the accidental hero. He
Mm.
doesn't want to be the hero, but those are always the best heroes, right? It's
Yes.
it's like the monk who says, "I don't want to be a bishop," right?
Please let that be the bishop that we get.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah. I like what you say there because I hadn't processed, but yes, so many of the poems are actually recited by Sam and sometimes are composed by him. If I remember right, Frodo even says that because Sam recites I think it's at the Trolls. He does the he recites the poem about the troll gnawing on the shin bone there, and Merry or Pippin ask, well, where was that from? And he was like, oh, it's just something I heard. And Frodo's like, oh, of course, he's only saying that because he composed it himself.
yes.
And Sam turns red.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
and we're skipping ahead, but I was super stoked when I did some research on that, just some web searches, and realized that that's supposed to be sung, and it's sung to the tune of "The Fox Went Out on a Chilly Night,"
oh,
um, which is a tune that I know, so that was exciting. But anyway, so then, having argued with Ted Sandiman, Sam goes home, and the narrator tells us that just as he's walking up the hill, at that very moment, Gandalf returns for the first time in 9 years. And with that return, we're off to the races. Gandalf's first words note that Frodo looks the same as ever. Frodo says the same to Gandalf, but secretly he thinks that Gandalf looks older and more careworn. So there's a lot of meaning in that. That Frodo looks the same as ever is ominous. That Gandalf looks older and more careworn is also ominous, and for the same reason, ultimately. They're
yes.
both dealing with evil from the same source. But they talk late into the night, and then the next morning, the real conversation begins. So would you read this bit, Cyril, as Frodo begins to speak to Gandalf and invites the Silmarillion to come to the Shire?
Certainly. Last night you began to tell me strange things about my ring, Gandalf, he said, and then you stopped because you said that such matters were best left until daylight. Don't you think you had better finish now? You say the ring is dangerous, far more dangerous than I guess. In what way? In many ways, answered the wizard. It is far more powerful than I ever dared to think at first, so powerful that in the end it would utterly overcome anyone of mortal race who possessed it. It would possess him. A mortal, Frodo, who keeps one of the great rings, does not die, but he does not grow or obtain more life. He merely continues until at last every minute is a weariness, and if he often uses the ring to make himself invisible, he fades. He becomes in the end invisible permanently and walks in the twilight under the eye of the dark power that rules the rings. Yes, sooner or later if he is strong or well meaning to begin with, but neither strength nor good purpose will last. Sooner or later, the dark power will devour him.
Yeah. And then, Frodo's response, I didn't include in the script, but he's like, how terrifying. And there's another silence. And then you
Yeah.
hear Sam cutting the lawn. And I'm like, how terrifying. Frodo says conversationally. I mean,
Yeah,
he doesn't really seem moved by this yet, which
right.
is remarkable because, what Gandalf says, your ring is more powerful I ever dared to think. So powerful, it would overcome, it would possess anyone who possessed it. And Frodo's like, well, that's scary. Like, this is not the reaction that I would expect.
Right. It's almost the reaction is this actually happening to me?
Mm,
Type thing. And
right.
I mean, he just thought this was it seemingly he thought it was just a thing for a party trick, right?
Yeah.
He had no idea, though Gandalf's repeated, please don't use it, please don't use it, avoid using it, right? Should have
Mm-hmm.
told him something's up. What has got him so worried? And and in a sense, him hiding it as well from Bilbo, right? He already has suspicions, but I think he knows that if he had told Bilbo all of this, Bilbo never would have left the ring to Frodo, right? But now,
Yeah.
yeah, but that goes to something else that we have to talk about in a bit. So,
Right. I, before we move on, I want to flag something you said there because this is something that I think needs to be talked about, especially in the next chapter. But it's visible and it's striking here. How, on the one hand, how careful Gandalf is being with the way that he speaks about this. He knows that this is serious and perilous, and at the same time, how much he's entrusting to the hobbits, to Bilbo and to Frodo, how much he's leaving these decisions in their hands.
mm,
He's not micromanaging them, you know, and 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 Frodo seems to. Well, I think there's visible here something that anyone with a spiritual father has experienced, right? You come for confession, you confess your sins, and you expect to be told what to do and how everything is supposed to go so that everything will work out fine. But there is no guarantee that it will work out fine. And it's not your spiritual father's job necessarily to lay out for you what the path is, because you have to walk the path.
yes.
And the extent to which Gandalf trusts
Mm,
and allows Frodo to play this out himself is really striking. And the extent what we see of Frodo is he gradually becomes aware that he's not just been entrusted with this responsibility by Gandalf. This is his responsibility.
yes.
No one else can take this for him. No one else can tell him how he has to do it. He has to do this himself. He has to set his own hands to the plow.
I find that very much true. I think about my own confessor. Um, he is he will be 88 this year and
Mm-hmm.
has health struggles, but he's just been so incredibly good. And I think about all the advice he's given me. Most of it is stuff I just need to be reminded of.
Mm-hmm.
But I still remember the first time I went to him over 20 years ago when he just said to me this truism: the struggles you have now, you will always have till the end of your life,
Mm-hmm.
right? How will you master them, right? By God's grace.
Right.
And I think this goes to it that everyone's struggle is truly their own. And in a sense, as we will see in a bit, this is a duty that God gave uh, Bilbo, as we will talk about. But in a sense, every one of us, our path, and I think and I think about Saint Mary of Egypt and Zosimus, and I was just reading about this whole incident of Saint Macarius showing up at Saint Pachomius's monastery and putting all his monks to shame by his austerity, right?
Mm.
And that in a sense Zosimus had to learn that there were other people who were, let us say, more devout than he, that could teach him something. It was this poor naked old woman who had been, a woman of
Right.
negotiable morality. And the that everyone has to learn how to bear their own cross, and sometimes the crosses are incredible. And I think that in this sense, this is part of what's creating Frodo's um, character as we see it throughout.
Mm-hmm.
That Tolkien holds what Aristotle said, that characters are the plot. And
Right.
this is so true here. But I liked also the interesting thing about Frodo is unchanged.
Mhm.
Gandalf seems more old and careworn, though of course we know that Gandalf doesn't age, but that's how now he seems to Frodo. Yeah.
Right. Who is unchanging. Um, and hidden in that perhaps is also a statement that what is static, what is unchanging, is not actually good, is not actually natural, which is the problem with the elves as well. But we can get into that more. So anyway, moving on because we've only begun the chapter and we're already an hour plus in. So Gandalf talks more
Right.
about the rings, and describes, he repeats what Bilbo said, how he was feeling thin and stretched. And then he tells how troubled he was to find that Bilbo had lied about how he acquired the ring. It wasn't like Bilbo. Then he says, I told Bilbo often that such rings were better left unused, but he resented it and soon got angry. There was little else that I could do. I could not take it from him without doing greater harm, and I had no right to do so anyway. I could only watch and wait. And this is really just continuing continuing the theme that we were just discussing. Gandalf recognizing the limits of how much control he can exercise on another human, on another soul.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that this is also important that I remember seeing, we live in a world of memes, right? But, right, it's like, I can't wait for the election so that my half of the world can tell the other half of the world how to live. And, right, that we need to remember that God did not force us to love him, and we cannot force other people to do the same. And I think this is one of the great things about Tolkien's laying out for us, right, as the beginning of every episode says, right, that inspires us to the good and the beautiful. And I think this is really the thing that needs to be done. I mean, Gandalf certainly wanted to warn, but at the same time, you can't coerce. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's part of it.
Can't coerce, won't coerce,
Yeah.
recognizing the harm that would be done by that as well. There's a profound pastoral care that is exercised by Gandalf.
Oh,
So so Gandalf talks about watching and waiting and thinking everything will be fine, hoping everything will be fine, making reference. Well, Bilbo has a long lived. All of his ancestors are long lived.
right.
Maybe this is just natural and normal
Yes.
until the unexpected party itself. And I'll read this bit. So he says, "And I waited until that night when he left this house. He said and did things then that filled me with a fear that no words of Saruman could allay. I knew at last that something dark and deadly was at work, and I spent most of the years since then in finding out the truth of it."
Yeah.
So then he talks about how Bilbo is fine, now he's given up the ring, but then we get the pivotal scene in which Gandalf asks for the ring, throws it into the fire, and reveals first Frodo's attachment to it, that Frodo's unwilling to throw it in the fire. And then he reveals the fiery letters and the final lines of the ring poem. So would you read that, Cyril, in Gandalf's commentary?
Yes. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the dark lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. He paused and then said slowly in a deep voice, "This is the master ring, the one ring to rule them all. This is the one ring that he lost many ages ago to the great weakening of his power. He greatly desires it, but he must not get it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I remember when I first opened up the Lord of the Rings. That's the first thing I saw, because that's at the
Right.
very beginning, right? And I'm just
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my word, what's going on here? And yeah, yeah. So and of
So
course, um,
go ahead.
well, I mean the MOR, right, of Mordor, which goes back
Mm.
to Morgoth, and which
Yes.
we don't hear anything about really. Um, but it Tolkien realized how syllables actually act upon us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that there are words that are so commonplace, but can nonetheless be beautiful if we actually think about them, and words ultimately that bring about dread just by the sound of their
Yes.
words. Yeah. And
It's incredible. So a question came to me for the first time as you were reading that, and I've not asked this before or seen it asked. Who is supposed to have composed the Ring poem?
hmm,
Because and the question being, this characterizes the three races that get rings,
yes.
but is this characterization from themselves, or is this how Sauron views them as slaves to be controlled?
Hmm.
Because the final words are his because he puts them on the ring. Anyway, what do you think?
The hmm. So it's interesting that I mean in the ancient world, people would often write about themselves in the third person, right? It's a trick question I ask my students about who said Vini, Vidi, Vici. And they're like, well, Caesar said it. I'm like, no, he didn't say it. He wrote it on placards that his legions carried through Gaul. He never said it, right? Because he always wrote about himself in the Gallic Wars in the third person. And I had never thought about this because I'm a completely modern reader. Um, you know, did Sauron create the inscription?
Hmm.
Because it seems to have been, as we look at it, it seems to have been written in Elven letters.
Mm, right.
And so, was how did the One Ring was made in Mount Doom? Obviously, no elves were there. How did the Elven writing get on it? Did
Mm,
Sauron want to use it because it embellished the ring and didn't want
mm,
to use the language of Mordor? I mean, obviously, he knew Elvish writing. Um,
sure.
so, but it is a who wrote this, but obviously also um, the 7 and the 9 were all made by him. The
Right.
3 were not.
Right.
And but this one was made to enslave the 3,
Right.
right? And and ultimately is Tolkien being, of course, very much an Augustinian. One of the great dominating factors in men's mind is the lust for power. The lust for
Mm,
power. It's why men are so easily seduced.
right.
And um, and of course, many of the elves. I don't say my favorite elf, but always I keep going back to Feanor, right?
Mm,
And this drive, this he was possessed of this will to power as well.
right.
And but this is Sauron par excellence. Um, but yeah, who? I mean, I
If
would have to say he wrote it because I don't know when else it would have been written because
right.
Isildur
How could
refused
it
to give
get
it
on the
up.
ring?
Yes,
Right.
yes,
Because the ring
and
can't be affected, but yeah.
yeah, the I'm trying to remember. Um, I'm
So
trying to
let me throw
remember.
out what I'm thinking here,
Yeah,
and
go
then
ahead.
because just running with the hypothesis that he's the one who composed it, it kind of problematizes because it's the first thing that we see, and that's a really interesting move. That the first lines we get are actually really one of the few things in the voice of Sauron, and it's just kind of hiding there in plain sight. And it defines the three races, but with the eye only of one who wants to dominate them.
Yes.
And specifically then the description of the elven kings under the sky. Well, the elven, they don't identify themselves as kings. Gil-galad is a king, but
Mm,
Elrond isn't. Galadriel is a queen, but even then she doesn't really function that way.
right.
And Círdan, who holds one of the rings, he's not a king either. So who's going to call them a king except perhaps Sauron, who's jealous of their natural
Hmm.
and intrinsic mastery of Middle Earth, where because they are they're so deeply, they are the natural stewards and rulers of the creation. They're
Hmm.
intrinsically connected to it, where Sauron has to come in and use a forced and artificial domination. The dwarf lords he despises. They're in their halls of stone. They're
Right.
burrowers. The mortal
Right.
men, they're nothing. They're doomed to die. They can be
Right.
used, but the Dark Lord, right? The only strange thing is that he calls himself the Dark Lord. Uh,
Yes.
it, 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 but otherwise, I think it makes sense as being Sauron's voice speaking of the three races that he seeks to dominate, and especially revealing weirdly the jealousy of the Elven kings, who, without having to walk that path of darkness, because they're under the sky, in the open, naturally and easily, lords of everything that they see.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, Father, this has a lot more unpacking to do. Um,
Mm.
you're right. There's this great ring about it, three rings for the elven kings under the sky. How much the elves love the stars. When they were
Right.
first came forth, there was no sun, there was no moon, they were just under the stars. Um, and nine for mortal men doomed to die. I have to confess, until you just said that, I always looked at that line, nine for mortal men doomed to die, that those nine were the ones doomed to die, as opposed to
Hmm.
man as a race.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
but because whoever possessed those now became exactly how Gandalf described the ring and the ring's power to whoever possessed it, what was going to happen to them. This was now the
Right.
ring wraiths. But no, but men are throwaway
Yeah.
commodities, right? That's all they are.
And you
Yeah.
enslave them with that fear of death. You promise them a sort of immortality, but it's not actual life that is unending. It's just the one life that you have stretched and stretched and stretched until
Yes.
there's nothing left of you.
Yeah. And that,
Huh.
of course, that great line, right? Too much, too little butter scraped over, too much bread.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh,
So, but we didn't talk about Gandalf's statement as just his description of Bilbo leaving. He did things and said things that filled me with fear.
oh,
Uh, some of the more like grave and sober and terrifying words that if Gandalf says I was filled with fear, something dark and deadly, so well written, this passage,
yes.
just it's like hammer stroke saying because I guess I read this like Frodo. I'm like, oh, cool adventure story. Oh, this ring, what a scary thing. Oh, well, but it's not actually going to touch me, but it's like pounding it in. You
Yeah.
must take this seriously.
Yeah, and going back to that, I was talking to my daughter who loves Tolkien, and you know, in reality, it's been. I mean, Gandalf has come back, but he's been 16 years since that night,
Mm,
trying to track all this down. More than 16 when he finally shows back up and just says,
right.
"Look," and um, I've been down some pretty dark paths, um, which is completely foreshortened in the movie, but it's a movie. You have to
Yeah.
do those things. But here it's
Fine.
just like time has gone on and things have happened. Yeah.
Yeah. And those words, he really distills all the fear, all the worry, all the labor, all the suffering that he's experienced in those years into this single statement, and it all comes bearing down at once. So
Mm.
anyway, we should move on. Uh,
Yes, yes, yes.
so then we get the summary of the last alliance, of the taking of the ring from Sauron, and then how it was lost by Isildur and was then found by someone of hobbit kind, that statement that
Mm.
Frodo objects to, someone related to the fathers of the Stewards, and we get the sad story of Deagol and Smeagol. And Gandalf reveals to Frodo that this is actually the origin story of Gollum. Frodo is horrified. I assign myself to read this. So, Gollum,
Yes.
cried Frodo. Gollum? Do you mean that this is the very Gollum creature that Bilbo met? How loathsome! He finally shows some emotion.
Yes.
I think it is. I think it is a sad story, said the wizard, and it might have happened to others, even to some hobbits that I have known. I can't believe that Gollum was connected with hobbits, however distantly, said Frodo with some heat. What an abominable notion! It is true all the same, replied Gandalf. About their origins, at any rate, I know more than hobbits do themselves. And even Bilbo's story suggests the kinship. There was a great deal in the background of their minds and memories that was very similar. They understood one another remarkably well, very much better than a hobbit would understand, say, a dwarf, or an orc, or even an elf. Think of the riddles they both knew, for one thing.
Mm.
So, and I was struck with Gandalf's gentle rebuke of Frodo. I think this
Right.
is a sad story. And I have other thoughts, but what do you think on this?
Yeah, I so there's uh there's the prayer to Our Lady before bed. This is in the OCA book.
Mm,
Um, can God shake me and I do the same thing again an hour later?
mm,
And we don't understand our own selves and how frail and fraught we are. And Frodo seemingly has this image of himself and of all the respectable hobbits, and oh, we could never be, like Gollum, right? And of course, he doesn't see Gollum or Gollum's family. Like, so Gollum is almost always an outcast, even among the
yeah,
Stores that lived by the river, by the Anduin. They were respectable people. His, grandmother was this great matriarch, and they probably were very much like hobbits. And think about that they actually were out boating, right? And
right.
it's an interesting thing that we don't like this. We would never think of ourselves as Gollum,
Yeah,
right? And this is kind of what Frodo. I don't want to think of myself as Gollum. How could I ever? How could I ever be that? And
right.
Gandalf is just saying, you don't realize, right, the sadness here that this could have happened to anyone, and don't think you're so special that it could not have happened to you. I mean, this is all
Right.
foreshadowing,
Right.
right?
Don't think it couldn't have happened to others that you know, and be wary because you are the one in peril right now.
Yes.
You know, but he says it so gently. He doesn't force it on him. It's really
Not at all.
striking.
Yeah. And I think that this um, it's played up far more in the movies,
Hmm.
right? Of Frodo's growing sympathy for Gollum, whereas Sam
Yeah,
just sees right through it. And I
yeah,
don't know that Frodo doesn't see through it, but at the same
hmm,
time, he doesn't want to treat him the way Sam treats him. Um,
right.
so, yeah.
No, I think that's really important. It's really vital to notice that this is Frodo's first opinion of Gollum, because it's one of the more substantial developments in the whole course of the story. How he comes to treat him with kindness, with
Mm,
pity, with sympathy, and to really at the end recognize the commonality that they share the same burden.
yeah.
So the other thing I only was struck by on this read through was the way in which Gandalf emphasizes the the familiarity, the comfort of Gollum's people with water.
Mm,
Because in the previous chapter, I just on that read through, I commented, I talked about it with Brad, saying, why is this story about Frodo's parents drowning in a boating accident? Why is this here? Why is it treated as this sinister thing? What's the point of this? There's no purpose to it. But now I'm realizing there is a purpose, because it shows us that hobbits in general don't like boats. The only ones who actually like boats and are comfortable with it are the Bucklanders, Frodo's people,
yes.
his father's people, which, or rather, yeah, and and that means that he has that same Stour background, and the only purpose of this, the only other place where it's relevant is that this is a thing that they hold in common. At the very moment that Gollum's backstory is revealed, he's revealed as having a similar background, not just to hobbits in general, but to Frodo
Mm,
specifically.
mm,
And that is, I'm amazed at the care, because I've been reading this for I don't know how many decades, and I never
yeah.
noticed that. If
Yeah. I
I'm
mean, I
seeing right.
think about it too when they talk about Sam and boats
Mm.
later on, right? Sam's
Right.
completely right. What is this, right? Yeah. He
Yeah.
can't swim, right? So, anyway, yes.
But all right, so let's go on. So then we see Gandalf discussing how strange it is that the ring should have come to Bilbo. Not strange that it left
Mm,
Gollum. It could do nothing more with him. It wanted to find another master, another slave. But it's incredible that it should come to Bilbo. So would you read this vital passage as Gandalf reflects on this?
it was not Gollum, Frodo, but the ring itself that decided things. The ring left him. What, just in time to meet Bilbo? Said Frodo. Wouldn't an orc have suited it better? It is no laughing matter, said Gandalf. Not for you. It was the strangest event in the whole history of the ring so far. Bilbo's arrival just at that time and putting his hand on it blindly in the dark. There was more than one power at work, Frodo. The ring was trying to get back to its master. It had slipped from Isildur's hand and betrayed him. Then, when a chance came, it caught poor Deagle, and he was murdered. And after that, Gollum, and it had devoured him. It could make no further use of him. He was too small and mean, and as long as it stayed with him, he would never leave his deep pool again. So now, when its master was awake once more and sending out his thought from Mirkwood, it abandoned Gollum, only to be picked up by the most unlikely person imaginable, Bilbo from the Shire. Behind that, there was something else at work, beyond any design of the Ringmaker. I can put it no plainer than by saying that Bilbo was meant to find the ring and not by its maker, in which case you also were meant to have it. And that may be an encouraging thought.
And of course, Frodo's response is, "It is not,"
Yeah,
which means he completely misses the point.
yes.
But what's your read on what Gandalf is saying here?
Right. So I mean, there's no theology, as it were, in The Hobbit. I mean, there's lots of theology in The Hobbit, right? But there's nothing overt about it. And this is the first, as it were, overt implications that there is a power greater than Sauron that is
Yeah,
interfering in how things are going on.
yeah,
And, you know, God uses strange things to happen in this world. And I was thinking about that this morning when I went to pick up my ham, because I picked up a number of other items. And I had not gone to this store before. I'd gone by it several times. It was a butcher's. It was a country store. They were butchers. They had lots of other stuff. I picked up and I was seduced by many other things, shiny objects on their jalapeno jams and things like this.
Well, I mean, we're almost we're 6 full weeks into the fast.
Yes, we are.
Everything is looking good now.
Oh,
Even
I know it
Wendy's is
is.
looking good. But you were
So,
saying,
but yes, but um, I got there and I pulled out my credit card, and they said, "Oh, we don't take cards. We take checks or cash." And I had noticed there was an ATM in their store, and I'm like, "Oh." And just this morning, I had been carrying around several bills in my pocket. And
yeah.
I think, why do I keep carrying these around? I need to put them away as opposed to carrying them around in my pocket. And it was like, I'm glad I didn't leave this wad at home this morning. To which the lady says, "Oh, God works in mysterious ways." And I'm like, yes, he certainly does. And this is exactly what is happening here with Tolkien. Tolkien is introducing
Mm,
that there's a providence in the world. He doesn't use the word providence.
mm.
Um, Obviously, Gandalf's not a pagan, but Bilbo's a pagan, right?
Sure.
And so there's this presence here that uh, that obviously is guiding the story, but it's guiding it in such a um, behind the scenes way, right?
Mm,
Because it's unlikely things that
yeah,
God's using, right?
yeah.
And I think this is really it's a telltale thing that we should think about. God,
Mm,
right? In Pilgrim's Progress, there is the museum of small things that God has used, like the jaw of a donkey, right? That Samson, right?
right.
These small things that God uses. Who has despised the day of small things is what's going. Yeah.
Right. I was saying uh, just recently I was giving some counsel to someone who's struggling with some present challenges and saying, it's always hard to see God's mercy in the present. But if it's helpful, you know think about how you came to meet your spouse,
Mm,
and think about some decision, some small inconsequential decision that you made, because we all have these, where if you had chosen a different path, if you turned right instead of left, you never would have met her, you never would have married her, you never would have grown in the way that you have grown because God gave her to you. This is the way in which God works. Most of the time, for most of us, He doesn't force things upon us, but He offers us these opportunities, and I guess I think that the the, the challenging piece here, if within the story, the challenging piece is Frodo meant to have the ring because he is the only one who can save Middle-earth because he has some unique character that is there. And that certainly is implied, but there's another piece of it, at least in the reality of pastoral care, which is that God doesn't need any of us to accomplish his purposes. And the burdens, the crosses that he allows to each of us are the ones that we need for our salvation.
Yes.
And I think Tolkien hints at this a little bit with one of the few times we get Gandalf's point of view when Frodo wakes up in the house of Elrond, and Gandalf says, he's being purified. He's, and I forget the exact, if he goes on like he has, he'll become like a glass in which you can see the light clearly.
Yeah.
But that's down the road for now. It's just Frodo is meant to have this burden, which doesn't mean that it won't destroy him or destroy what he has been, but it. And this is the challenging, the struggle of pastoral care and of the Christian life. How do we learn to carry our cross without succumbing to it? And yet, I was reading in another book recently, I think it was, I'm forgetting the author's name, talking about we need to not just carry our cross, we need to learn to venerate it. Which doesn't mean that we love the sins or the struggles that we're enduring. We need to venerate the cross that they are for us, and something of that is present here.
Wow. Yeah, that's...
The other thing I'm struck by...
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, because we should talk.
Oh, no, I'm just saying that's really profound, and that so often we see our burdens as mere burdens, instead of seeing them as incredible ways for us to grow, to learn through our struggles, where we need to improve.
Right.
Yeah.
That they're an opportunity. There's not a guarantee, but but if we take up the cross instead of being crushed by it, then we will lose our life, but the Lord will give it back to us again.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Within the legendarium, I think there's something else that's interesting, because of course Gandalf is a Maya.
Yes.
He is a creature who, but one of the, so he's a creature, he's an angel, effectively, if you would say it that way. He was present at the music of the Ainur, so he was present with the three themes, with Morgoth's, opposition. But, and this kind of touches on how do we read all of this. But, so the Ainur, the Maya, the Valar, including Gandalf and Sauron, they were present for this music. They know from the music something of how everything is going to go. What they don't know, it seems, is what will the creatures who have free will, what will the children of Ilúvatar do? They don't know that. But they know that they are the children of Ilúvatar. They know that they are active, that they have that gift of free will, and that the choice, the stewardship of the creation is ultimately in their hands and not in the hands of the Maya or the Valar. And I think there's something of that behind this. Gandalf knows what he knows. He knows, what he is going to do. He knows what Sauron's going to do. He knows what the Valar are going to do, because whether he remembers it or not, but he was present for the music of the Ainur. He doesn't know what Ilúvatar, what God, is doing. He doesn't comprehend necessarily what those themes are, and he doesn't know what the children of Ilúvatar, which includes hobbits, are going to do. So he's effectively like giving an interpretation here. There's more here than anything I was doing, than anything Sauron was doing. There's more that, there's something beyond that design. and all I can do is recognize the fingerprints of God, of Ilúvatar, giving to his children the opportunity, the call, the cross to carry. But it's a way of saying that Frodo completely misunderstands. This burden is yours, but it's given to you by one whom you can trust.
Yeah. Yeah, that I mean that's my there's a lot to unpack there, because in one sense the ring is like the anti-cross, because
Yeah,
it's basically tempting us to say there's life outside of the surrender of life, right? So whosoever would save his life will lose it, and who would lose his life for my sake in the gospel shall find it.
right.
The ring is basically saying you don't need the cross. There's an easy way to obtain power,
Yeah.
and
You can.
you
There's a
know
shortcut.
it's a shortcut. But suddenly the anti-cross is Frodo's cross.
Right.
It's like, you're going to bear this thing that could absolutely destroy you, and you need,
Right.
right? And so I know it's jumping into the next chapter, but like, this is like, the elves don't want to tell them everything, right?
Right.
And you hear so often about people who have done great things in history. If they had known what they were going to face, would they have gone down that road? And I
Right.
think in some ways, right, having encouraging news like you were meant to have it may have been the thing to
Yeah.
help push him out the door, right?
Right. Even though he says it doesn't help at all, and I don't understand you, but oh
Yeah.
well. All right, we've got to move on, because we could talk about
Yes,
this
yes.
for hours and hours.
Oh,
And ultimately, when we read Tolkien, we are talking about this kernel. This piece is at the core of it.
yeah.
But anyway, so Frodo asks Gandalf how Gandalf knows all of this, and Gandalf explains his research, and most remarkably, that he has, in fact, met and talked with Gollum, and he's confident Gollum has been to Mordor and had revealed to Sauron the whole story, so that now the servants of Sauron are seeking the Shire, and hobbits, and are even searching for Baggins. So I'll begin this selection with Gandalf's warning, and then I'll ask you to continue the text, Cyril. So he says, "The Shire. He may be seeking for it now, if he has not already found out where it lies. Indeed, Frodo, I fear that he may even think that the long unnoticed name of Baggins has become important." "But this is terrible!" cried Frodo. "Far worse than the worst that I imagined from your hints and warnings. Oh, Gandalf, best of friends, what am I to do? For now I am really afraid." "What am I to do? What a pity that Bilbo did not stab that vile creature when he had the chance." "Pity? It was pity that stayed his hand. Pity and mercy not to strike without need. And he has been well rewarded, Frodo. Be sure that he took so little hurt from the evil and escaped in the end, because he began his ownership of the ring so, with pity." "I am sorry," said Frodo, "but I am frightened, and I do not feel any pity for Gollum." "You have not seen him," Gandalf broke in. "No, and I don't want to," said Frodo. "I can't understand you. Do you mean to say that you and the elves have let him live on after all those horrible deeds? Now, at any rate, he is as bad as an orc, and just an enemy. He deserves death."
Deserves it. I dare say he does. Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them? Then do not be too eager to deal out death in judgment, for even the very wise cannot see all ends. I have not much hope that Gollum can be cured before he dies, but there is a chance of it, and he is bound up with the fate of the ring. My heart tells me that he has some part to play yet, for good or ill, before the end. And when that comes, the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many, yours not least. In any case, we did not kill him. He is very old and very wretched. The wood elves have him in prison, but they treat him with such kindness as they can find in their wise hearts. All the same, said Frodo. "Even if Bilbo could not kill Gollum, I wish he had not kept the ring. I wish he had never found it, and that I had not got it. Why did you let me keep it? Why didn't you make me throw it away or destroy it?" "Let you? Make you?" said the wizard. "Haven't you been listening to all that I have said? You are not thinking of what you are saying."
I feel like between our two readings, we could do an entire series of podcasts just on this stuff.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
but there, go ahead.
oh, I mean, I was just going to dive in.
But by all means, dive in.
Well, I mean, just the very thing he says, "I am frightened, and I do not feel any pity for Gollum." Right?
Mm-hmm.
How like, I mean, as you read it, it's like, oh, now I'm really scared. Now suddenly you've let me know everything I need to know, and now what is happening here?
Yeah.
And but how, as we read in Holy Scripture, that there's a sense in which fear displaces love, but love drives out fear.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And the thing is that pity, in a sense, is a form. I mean, as I've heard said, and Father, you may not agree or whatever, you don't have to like somebody, but you do have to love them.
Mm.
And doubtless, Gollum is a completely unlikable creature, but Bilbo showed love to him by not killing him when he could have.
Right.
So yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Well, I agree completely, and I'm really struck by, again, Frodo shows on the one hand both his immaturity, but also in general the wholeness of his character, because being corrected, he doesn't double down, he doesn't defend himself, he like I wish I could convince all my kids to apologize in this way. He says he's sorry. he he speaks his emotions, and he says, "I don't feel any pity for Gollum." He tells the truth about himself.
Yes.
He acknowledges that maybe that truth isn't where he should be, but he acknowledges the truth. This is a confession, in a
Yes.
sense. It's honest and real, and open to growth. But I am sorry, but I am frightened, and I don't feel any pity for Gollum. Not, but I am right, and you are wrong, but I'm frightened.
Yes.
I don't feel any pity, but I am sorry, and I'm willing to. But then he argues later. So.
And it is, and it goes back also to the point of the workings of Iluvatar as well, right? That in a sense, Bilbo was the right person to find it, because Bilbo was not going to kill Gollum, or right, and that he didn't kill him could change the fates of many, and most of all you. Right. I mean, that's such a great line. Um, and of course how he ends it, that Frodo still has this idea that I'm in control. And no, you couldn't throw it away. What are you talking about? Haven't you listened? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, I in a certain sense, if I were in the business of selling T-shirts for priests to wear, I would put that line there on a T-shirt. You know, I went and confessed to my spiritual father, such and such, and I asked him why he let me do this, and he said to me, "Let you? Make you? Haven't you been listening?"
Yeah.
What makes you think I can let you or make you do anything at all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Oh my goodness.
And it is, and I just I'm I'm part of a group that includes a number of priests, a private group, and
Yeah.
one of them posted something. It was something to the effect. It was from some Catholic parish about
Sure.
confessions will be held at this time. Just come in, tell me your sins, and don't try to explain everything, right?
Hmm.
And
Yes.
and one of the priests said, "I wish all my parishioners would read this." And
Hmm.
and I think about how often it is we try to massage our sins before our
Yeah.
confessors, right? It's nice having a confessor who's so much older than me. It's like, just cut to the chase. You know what you did, right? Just tell me what you did. Tell God, right?
Right.
And and this is just what Bilbo's done, right? I am sorry that I feel this way, but I am
Yeah.
scared, and I
Yeah.
have no pity for this creature, right?
Right.
And and I think that, and this is one of the things that Tolkien does. Tolkien is a really incredible psychologist. He
Mm.
sees the power of fear, and he sees the power of hate, and he sees the power of desire and lust for power. And I remember reading some years ago. I can't remember where I saw this, but somebody basically saying to the effect that, oh, R. Martin's characters are so much more believable than Tolkien's, and it's just like, this is ludicrous, because R. Martin's characters, they have no redeeming arc in any way
Right.
whatsoever. And I really don't even know that much about them. I think I watched the first 10 minutes of the first episode of that. I was like, I'm
Yeah.
not watching this. And
No.
the but just the incredible complexity of the characters in Tolkien.
Mm.
Um,
Yes. The depth and the truth of them. They ha- they have souls. I'm not saying that they actually have souls, but he writes them as creatures that are actually alive, that are
yes,
that are that we can see ourselves in, and not just a package of desires.
yes.
Um,
Yeah, I
that
mean, if you just think about, I mean, this is something you can keep unpacking, but the complexity that he writes into the four hobbits
mm,
as the whole story unfolds,
yeah.
and the fool of a took, right? That just keeps recurring, and yeah, it's. I mean, it's a great thing, and it's a great thing to. I remember there was a line from Lewis about rereading books, about what's coming. It's like anticipating meeting an old friend around the corner as you read.
Right.
And this is what I love about read, because honestly, Father, when you asked me to do this, I immediately picked up, and I'm just rereading everything now. I'll put
Right.
beside the other thing that I was reading at bedtime. I'm just going to reread this now again. And so, yeah, it's just so wonderful. Go ahead, Father.
Any invitation, but uh,
Yeah.
but before we move on, just there are so many lines in this passage that are quotable, that are memorable, that not just quotable, but that embed themselves in your memory the first time you hear them, which to
Mm.
my mind is one of those markers of really excellent writing. But maybe I'm wrong, but pity. It was pity that stayed his hand. Uh, and many that live deserve death, and some that
Oh,
die deserve
yeah.
life. Can you give it to them? Do not be too eager to deal out death and judgment. Uh, any of those individually, all of them together, even the very wise cannot see all ends.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah,
Yeah.
but
There's there's a
we've got to move on.
I know, I know, I know.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So then Frodo suggests the ring should be destroyed and offers to do so. And Gandalf kind of says, "You think it's that easy?" He then suggests he should throw it aside, and Gandalf explains that it can't be destroyed or thrown away. If you want to destroy it, you have to throw it in where it was forged. So Frodo's like, well, I'm not going to the cracks of doom. That's impossible.
Yeah.
So I'll give it away, and I'll read this bit. He
Yeah.
says, Gandalf, you are wise and powerful. Will you take the ring? "No!" cried Gandalf, springing to his feet. "With that power I should have power too great and terrible, and over me the ring would gain a power still greater and more deadly." His eyes flashed, and his face was lit as by a fire within. "Do not tempt me, for I do not wish to become like the Dark Lord himself. Yet the way of the ring to my heart is by pity, pity for weakness, and the desire of strength to do good. Do not tempt me. I dare not take it, not even to keep it safe, unused. The wish to wield it would be too great for my strength. I shall have such need of it. Great perils lie before me." I feel like we see more of Gandalf in this
Yeah.
moment than anything else, than anywhere else. Yeah.
Yeah.
What
And
strikes you in this?
yeah, so immediately, I mean, and this is outside of the canon, as it were, right? Where we read about, Gandalf being sent
Right.
initially. And so we know that the Maiar and the Valar are beings of various powers. We read at one place that some of the Maiar are almost as powerful as the Valar, of which
Right.
probably Sauron is one of them. And and Gandalf is just like this kind of low level clerk among the Maiar, but nonetheless, that's why he's sent. He
Yes.
understands his limitations, and here he says, "I understand my limitations because even over me, the ring would have a power, and it would pervert my good intentions." And I think this is so profound that there are things out there that even our best intentions cannot use to good ends.
Yeah.
And um and however great the dangers before me, I cannot pick this up. Sure, it would probably help, but it's not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
I,
it is
I
so. Yeah.
remember. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to I was just going to reiterate that. And yeah, I mean, it's true, he is wise and powerful. And I think there's almost a hint that maybe I could wield it. Maybe.
Mm,
But that's not a chance I can at all afford to take ever. Right?
right.
So, yeah.
Well, and I think that's always the idea. If I had power, I would use it better. Even if I started to use it badly, I would still be better. But you recognize that temptation, because once you start down that path, then you cease to be the person that would not use it in those other ways. And yeah, so much of life, of repentance, of obedience, of faithfulness is contained in this: do not use the tools of the enemy against him. Do not
Mm.
seek to use them in that way. For a silly example of this, I remember years ago when I was a very newly ordained. And I was preparing the stewardship section in the newsletter, and like the parish council vice president came in and was talking about stewardship was declining, because stewardship is always declining, and said, "Father, can't we just tell them that if they can't we just tell them that if they don't give, then they're going to go to hell?" Uh, and he was joking, and I was like, I think he was joking. I was like, no. No, it seems easy, but that would help, right? It would be nice to have a stick to beat, but no, we can't go down that. This has to be free. If it's not freely offered, then it's no good. Not for what it's actually needed for. The threat taints everything that would come from it. If we let ourselves put the survival of the parish above the gospel, above the truth of who Christ is and how he calls us, then it doesn't matter if it's a small thing. It's a silly example, but it's the same basic principle. Like, if we take that tool and start to threaten people, then we're no longer ministers of the grace of God. We're just another organization that wants to extract your coin from you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
That's a great way to look at it. And I think that my mind is running off on all sorts of directions about stewardship because I grew up in one of those parishes that beat you and beat you and beat you about tithing. The minister could be very funny about it, but at the same time,
Sure.
There's an element about of this coercion, right? Not freely you have received, freely give, and
Yeah.
so I think that the tools of the enemy, we can see this in so many other ways. People who think, oh, if we make, I'm not saying this of the Orthodox, so there might be some Orthodox who think this, right? If we make the liturgy more like a rock concert, people will show up, right? And
yeah,
I don't know about you, but people are now showing up so much at our parish that I don't, there's no one thinking like that at the moment. And
which is a great mercy. Yeah.
Yes. In a sense, it's the people fleeing the rock concert.
Right.
And
fleeing what is superficial and manipulative. And
yes. But I think this also is true here of what Gandalf is saying. There's no easy way for me to do what I need to do. And that's what the ring offers. Yeah.
Right. And there's and that I love how you. That's exactly the way to. I love how you interpret that. There's no easy way. He says, "I shall have such need of it, so I can't touch it. I can't have it because I will want it. I will need it, but I cannot. I can't take the easy way.
Yeah,
because it would destroy the path itself.
Yeah."
So. All right. So from there, we move swiftly to the conclusion of the chapter. Gandalf asks Frodo what he will do, giving him the choice, remarkably, amazingly, submitting his own will and the fate of the world, mire though he is, to the one who was meant to have the ring. And Frodo says this. Would you read it, Cyril?
Yes. As far as I understand what you have said, I suppose I must keep the ring and guard it, at least for the present, whatever it may do to me. Whatever it may do, it will be slow to evil if you keep it with that purpose, said Gandalf. I hope so, said Frodo, but I hope that you may find some other better keeper soon. But in the meanwhile, it seems that I am a danger to all that live near me. I cannot keep the ring and stay here. I ought to leave Bag End, leave the Shire, leave everything and go away, he sighed. I should like to save the Shire if I could, though there have been times when I thought the inhabitants too stupid and dull for words, and have felt that an earthquake or an invasion of dragons might be good for them. But I don't feel like that now. I feel that as long as the Shire lies behind, safe and comfortable, I shall find wandering more bearable. I shall know that somewhere there is a firm foothold, even if my feet cannot stand there again. Of course, I have sometimes thought of going away, but I imagine that as a kind of holiday, a series of adventures like Bilbo's or better, ending in peace. But this would mean exile, a flight from danger into danger, drawing it after me. And I suppose I must go alone if I am to do that and save the Shire. But I feel very small and very uprooted and, well, desperate. The enemy is so strong and terrible.
So I'd like to take back everything that I said about Frodo at the beginning, unmoved, quiet, just listening, la-di-da-di-da. Oh, how terrible. Because whether he was at the beginning, he gets it now.
Yeah.
This is amazing. And Gandalf says, he's like, hobbits can never cease to surprise you.
Yes.
We could sum this passage up as how to take up your cross in, 5 easy lessons from Frodo Baggins.
it's really a wonderful short. I mean, everything, of course, is wonderful. It's going all the way back to our letter at the beginning from
Mm.
Holly, right? That here was someone who thought deeply, and I think this is actually part about writing things out longhand.
Mm.
And it makes you think more circumspectly before you put the pen to paper. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, there's also an immense amount of his own reading and of his own thinking and of his own way of studying how people have put things. And one of the things that I'm a very firm believer in is that students need to read a lot and widely for themselves to become good writers. They need to study how other writers have themselves written. And
Mm-hmm.
and so here, I mean, everything, especially his lament about the Shire, right? That
Yes.
as long as I know that my leaving will make it, like, he's died to himself. He's taken up his cross. He says, I'm leaving everything behind so that I can save those who are here. I mean, it's just such a great whole section here, Father. So,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. I was really struck by the the grief there in this will be exile, a loss of home, a flight from danger into danger, and I guess I have to go alone.
Yeah.
He's like in an instant, effectively, or what might as well be an instant, everything that he values has been stripped from him, and yet he's still standing there, just confessing his fear, his smallness. Again, I wish people came to confession. I wish I could make my confessions like this, just clearly, frankly, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I know we're really up against the clock, and but it's interesting, right? He makes this confession, right, about the people of the Shire being stupid and dull, and they would do well to have an invasion of dragons, to wake them up. And I have to confess, Father. Of course, now I'm confessing on YouTube and everywhere else. I've so often thought that of people in my life. It's just like,
Oh my word, yes.
yeah. And but here Frodo gets around it, and he realizes, no, this would not be the thing that would help them at all, right? It is yeah.
Yeah. Because if he has to go into danger, then now he's grateful that at least not everyone has to. That there can be the possibility for other people to still be safe and comfortable and not troubled by this. Of course, it doesn't work out that way, but
Right.
That would be to skip to the end.
Yes.
So anyway, we should continue. Yeah. Gandalf is pleased and impressed, and says so, and then he hears and then finds Sam eavesdropping, and Gandalf first tests Sam, makes sure that he's. I don't think Gandalf ever thought Sam was actually a spy of Sauron, but he questions him as though he were, but then he assigns Sam to accompany Frodo, and what Sam says is worth discussing. So I'll
Yes.
read his two relevant lines first, as he tells Gandalf what he has heard, and then I'll have you read what happens after. So Sam says, when Gandalf asks, "What did you hear?" "Well, sir," said Sam, dithering a little, I heard a deal that I didn't rightly understand about an enemy and rings and Mr. Bilbo, sir, and dragons." "There were no dragons." "And a fiery mountain and elves, sir." "I listened because I couldn't help myself, if you know what I mean. Lord bless me, sir, but I do love tales of that sort. And I believe them, too, whatever Ted may say. Elves, elves, sir? I would dearly love to see them. Couldn't you take me to see elves, sir, when you go? So Sam asks to go too. And
Yeah.
then when Gandalf tells him that he shall go away with Frodo, if you read our last passage
Yes.
here.
Me, sir, cried Sam, springing up like a dog invited for a walk. Me, go and see elves and all. Hooray! He shouted, and then burst into tears.
Oh my.
Uh,
Completely different character from the others that we've seen
yes.
in the chapter. If anything, more honest, less studied, less curated, just present and honest and open.
Yeah, and it's something that'll carry on, right, all the way through, right?
Yeah.
He stays in character, right?
Yeah.
And deep, thoughtful, but I would also say at times blunt and not overly subtle. And
yes.
But also at the same time, like, just that last line, why does he burst into tears? Does he burst into tears suddenly realize I'm leaving the Shire and I'm not? Yeah. Why? Or is it just that I'm now bound to Frodo? Yeah.
Right. Which he wants to be.
Yes.
I've always read it, I think, is just the intensity of conflicting emotions, the frustration with Ted and the anxiety about everything else that we saw already presented, plus the fear of being caught and the awe of Gandalf and the terror of Frodo leaving and the chance of seeing elves. Sam is just... I remember, I was reading to my daughter lately from The Magician's Nephew, and if you recall, during the 2 chapters where the White Witch is in London, he keeps on throwing in these asides about how the housemaid is really having this amazing day. Sam seems kind of like that, except it's not an amazing day. It's just everything is coming at him at once. I think he cries. I think he bursts into tears because he's overwhelmed.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that's all incredibly much right there, because it's. I mean, if you just could imagine yourself, like, you want to believe in dragons. Ted Sandyman says they don't, and he mocks me, and everybody thinks I'm crazy because Ted says I'm crazy. But here I am, and now I'm listening to the two of you, and you say these things, and it's like, and now I get to go with you. Oh no, I'm going with you. It's the old word is peripety, meaning, a change in direction from everything that's happened, that suddenly this homebody is now going to become the world traveler, right? The story,
right?
I mean, more adequately, it's a wild shift in the story, but here it's a peripety for Sam. He's gone from the gardener, right? I don't know if you remember, there's a movie, things called Being There, about Chance the gardener, and everybody thought his name was Chauncey Gardner. Oh. And they all thought he was this brilliant, brilliant man, when he was just basically talking about gardening all the time. And Peter Sellers was who was in it, but of course, but here it's Sam becomes this enormous character, and eventually, right, especially when we get into Minas Morgul, I remember people saying, somebody, I can't remember, God doesn't give you dying grace on a non-dying day. I don't know how true that is, but yeah, I mean,
I like the saying regardless.
Yeah, that God equips us, and at that moment, Sam was not equipped. Frodo wasn't equipped, right?
No.
But yeah.
But so. What I just noticed as we're talking about this, though, is Frodo's one lament is having to become an exile, to leave the Shire behind, And Gandalf telling him you don't need to go alone is kind of undercutting. Frodo's ready to take on a heavier burden than he can really carry, which I've certainly done in confession. I didn't mean to make this all about confession, but it feels that way to me as we talk about it. I've certainly tried to take on a heavier burden in confession, and I see people trying to do that as well, when I'm hearing confessions. But Gandalf says, don't make this harder than it has to be already. But what I was getting at is, at the end of the day, Frodo doesn't have to completely leave the Shire, because Sam is almost this personification of the Shire, with his hands deep in the soil of the Shire, and Sam comes with Frodo, being sometimes stupid and dull, and sometimes firm and real and wholesome. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think this also goes back to people suffer from what is commonly termed the Stoic fallacy, that what I can do once, I can do all the time. Right. Therefore, I've resisted this here. Therefore, I can resist it all the time. It's why people think they stand and then they fall. And,
Yeah.
Character is built over long, long periods, like turning coal into diamonds. It takes, lots of forces to make you what you're supposed to be. And even then, we don't get to it. As my confessor said, we should hope for long lives to have times to repent of our sins. And and I think that, going back about the formation of souls, right? This is what we see happening. We see the formation of their souls going on and on and on. And in one place, you'll eventually get to, are you going to do the appendices?
Of course we'll do the appendices.
Okay.
It wouldn't count without doing them. At least I hope so. If God is gracious and gives us enough time.
Yeah, but in the appendices, we get a glimpse of the formation of Aragorn. Because when we meet him, right, he's more or less fully formed already. And he becomes this kind of one stone block, right, in the midst of it all. And whereas all the other characters, we see change. We see even change in Legolas and Gimli, right, who have been around for a while. So all of this is, and of course, Gandalf is surprised by hobbits, what they can do.
Right.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Cyril, I feel like we could have had this conversation 3 times and talked about 3 had completely different conversations each time. Yeah. But I'm very grateful that we got to do The Shadow of the Past with you. But now it's time to move on. So our next segment here is where we have our guest co-hosts read to us. So, there are plenty of Tolkien media properties these days, but for us, the books are paramount. And it's always delightful to hear how different people interpret reading them out loud. So for this segment, Cyril, I'd love you to pick a favorite passage and read it to us. So
sure.
What have you picked, and what do you like about it before you jump into it?
Sure. So I'm actually reading from the very, very end of The Hobbit. And because it kind of leads into everything that we've talked about, and it will also it comes back throughout everything that is going on. And it's of course, since I've been on the show quite a bit, I've had to jump through what am I going to read now? What am I going to read now? And there actually is no lack of passages. I mean, maybe if the show went on for 1,000 years, maybe I would kind of come to I'd have to start all over. But so that's what I'm reading from. And I think some ways it's rather explanatory. But anyway, off we go.
Beautiful. Let's hear it.
One autumn evening, some years afterwards, Bilbo was sitting in his study writing his memoirs. He thought of calling them There and Back Again, a hobbit's holiday, when there was a ring at the door. It was Gandalf and a dwarf, and the dwarf was actually Balin. Come in, said Bilbo, and soon they were settled in chairs by the fire. If Balin noticed that Mr. Baggins's waistcoat was more extensive and had real gold buttons, Bilbo also noticed that Balin's beard was several inches longer, and his jeweled belt was of great magnificence. They fell to talking of their times together, of course, and Bilbo asked how things were going in the lands of the mountain. It seemed they were going very well. Bard had rebuilt the town and dale, and men had gathered to him from the lake and from south and west, and all the valley had become tilled again and rich, and the desolation was now filled with birds and blossoms in spring, and fruit and feasting in autumn. And Lake Town was refounded and was more prosperous than ever, and much wealth went up and down the running river, and there was friendship in those parts between elves and dwarves and men. The old master had come to a bad end. Bard had given him much gold for the help of the lake people, but being of the kind that easily catches such disease, he fell under the dragon sickness and took most of the gold and fled with it, and died of starvation in the waste, deserted by his companions.
Hmm.
The new master is of a wiser kind, said Balin, and very popular, for of course he gets most of the credit for the present prosperity. They're making songs which say that in his day the rivers run with gold. Then the prophecies of the old songs have turned out to be true after a fashion, said Bilbo. Of course, said Gandalf, and why should not they prove true? Surely you don't disbelieve the prophecies because you had a hand in bringing them about yourself. You don't really suppose, do you, that all your adventures and escapes were managed by mere luck, for just your sole benefit? You are a very fine person, Mr. Baggins, and I am very fond of you, but you are only quite a little fellow in a wide world after all. Thank goodness, said Bilbo, laughing, and handed him the tobacco jar.
So
So
I
it
love
goes
that
back
passage.
there.
Yeah, go ahead. You first.
Oh, well, I mean, it does go to the thing about, right, you believe in luck. You believe all this has happened to you
Right.
because of you, right? That
Mm-hmm.
everything unfolded because something else was happening that
Right.
guided what events. I mean, that was one small thing of it, but also uh, I mean, and of course, the whole notion of prophecy, but
Mm.
the whole thing that things have now turned out well, that the desolation was being
Mm.
made beautiful, and Bard is now, Lord of Dale, and all of these things that, I mean, it is very much the happy ending, and
Yes.
um, and it leaves it on such a high note, almost a high
Yeah.
English note, right, in the sense of how it
Yes.
goes. Yes. So,
And what's striking, though, for all that is that there's a lot of material still to work with when it comes to the sequel. Uh, and even as you said, it touches on that. You know, well, I guess what I should say is, Bilbo says, "Oh, so the prophecies actually came true," and Gandalf's criticism has always been a little obscure to me, and maybe still remains so. Because he's like, why do you disbelieve the prophecies coming true just because you had a hand in them?
hmm.
Because I'm not certain how that connects to disbelieving the. I'm not sure I follow the logical thread there. But usually when I can't follow the logical thread, it's because there's something really profound there that I haven't noticed.
Hmm.
And I wonder if there's something in there of our, at least modern humanity.
Hmm.
We tend to disbelieve that we're actually taking part in anything important or anything, because it's happening to us, and that kind of thing doesn't happen to us, or we're I'm not saying this well, but maybe I can frame it in this way. We question whether anything grand or historic or spiritual is happening. Anything of true momentous, because we're pretty conscious that we're just small and unimportant. But again, as I say this, Gandalf corrects him by saying, "You are small, and yet you've had a part in the fulfilling of these prophecies, which are a much larger thing. But you disbelieve that." Again, something's always felt a little bit odd, and I wonder if you can help me with this.
Yeah, I think there's something to the fact that so I grew up a Methodist. I had no idea what that meant. I got into college and I read myself into Calvinism. And so, but still, even as a Calvinist, I'm struggling with this, whole question of will and free will and all these things. And then, of course, as an Orthodox, this is fundamental to what we think, that the will is free. God forces no one to love him. And, I still remember there's a line in Calvin about how the church fathers were very bad on this issue, especially Chrysostom. And but I think it goes to the idea that, yes, we are free, but there's still the hand of God that we can't see. And there's an element in which, well, yeah, these things happen, but they happen because didn't I put some salt in the stew, or didn't I do this or that? And I think Gandalf's reprimand is yes, the prophecies have come true. Yes, you did have a hand in that, but you have to realize you are such a little fellow in the wide, wide world. And you might not think, oh, these things wouldn't have happened without me, but they would have, because even the smallest people are still of great consequence. And I think this is part of history that we don't realize at times what consequences, we have in people's lives, right? So I don't want to say this is a commentary on It's a Wonderful Life, but in some ways it's like that, right? We don't realize the impact on all the people we've had around us. And and I think that, as a priest, as a professor, there's a lot of gardening. So my father was a contractor, and I worked my way through university as a carpenter. And there's something at the end of the day, you sweep up and you can see everything you've done.
Right.
Teaching Latin or hearing confession, it's always no, let's go back. Let's think about this again. Right.
Yeah.
But it's hard to miss what impact we have on people's lives. And so I try to take it really seriously that I have no idea what these kids are going through. I might be the best illustration to them of what the faith should be, and I need to take that seriously. And so, yeah, I'm not the greatest scholar that's ever lived. I'm not the greatest thinker that's ever lived. I'm not anything. Now that my daughter's an adult, I'm not even, the hero in her eyes really that much anymore. But take these things serious. And I think that that's part of it, is that we undersell ourselves, but at the same time, we can also misplace our place at times. So, yes.
Right. So there's a sense, basically, he's saying it's a balance, I guess, is the point. Bilbo could say, oh, prophecies actually came true. Wow. That never happens, and that needs to be corrected. But he could also say, yeah, prophecies took place and I was the one that did it. And that's also a mistake. But there's the balance where, larger things are happening than you, but you had a role to play in that. And don't discount that, because that intersection of the grand sweep of the whole history of creation and the encounter of the creation with its creator, that is a bigger thing than any one of us, and yet the only place where we can experience that is in our own selves, and you have to hold both things in tension.
Yes.
Something along those lines?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that because we always run the kind of the dual temptation. I'm insignificant. Nobody cares about me. I'm unimportant. To, hey, you better listen to me. I have a PhD. I've written books. What are you doing? Right?
Right.
And I think it's always that temptation, of virtue, of striking the balance between, the opposing vices, as it were. So I'm not sure if Tolkien, I mean, I know Tolkien wrote about this because he wrote about it in Leaf by Niggle. I mean, this is obvious, one of the chief things he's thinking about there.
Yeah.
Is that what he's getting at here? I actually, more now that I think more about it, it's like, this is a kind of a conundrum, what's going on here. Mm-hmm. As with many things, there's much to think.
It's striking that he throws in this actually fairly profound philosophical poser. Well, I don't know if it's a poser, but it's a challenging passage. It's not just a write-off, and then everyone lived happily ever after. La-di-da.
Yeah.
At any rate, thank you, Cyril. That's beautiful.
Very welcome, Father.
And now, it's time for a little segment that we like to call They're Taking the Hobbits to Isengard. So, I didn't realize that for all that you've been on here for so many times, you've never had to do this, and I hope you'll forgive me after this first time, because this is the time when you get to play for absolutely no prizes a little game which will test whether you are a true Tolkien fan whom everyone should listen to, or whether we've just wasted 2.5 hours of everyone's time. So this is a different format than what Father Andrew had done. It's one I inherited from my father and uncles. They used to play this homemade trivia game with each other when I was young. So the game is this. We will actually in turn, I'll read a quote from Tolkien's works, and you have to tell me who the speaker was. And there's bonus points. Again, no bonus, but actual metaphorical bonus points if you can give the context as well.
All right.
There are 3 rules. It has to be an actual quotation by a named character. No gotchas that are just the narrator talking. It'll be a full sentence or a sentence fragment if that's all that is quoted. And it'll only be taken from The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. No Silmarillion, no History of Middle-earth. I'll give you an example so you can see what sort of skullduggery you have to watch for. The first time my dad did this with me, the quote he gave me was, "There let it lie until the end." I eventually remembered, or I think actually he had to tell me, that Saruman says this in the Legendarium, but the speaker in the books is actually Gandalf quoting Saruman at the Council of Elrond. So, let the player beware. Do you think you're up for it?
No, I know I'm. So years ago, Father had a live podcast with the Ancient Faith, right? And he had a quiz that was myself, Michael, a quiz show. Myself, Michael Haldus, Deacon Nicholas, and there was someone else who. Steve.
Steve Christoforo.
Yeah, Steve Christoforo. And there we were playing for prizes, but for people in the audience. And I ended up winning. And I'm like, this should go for a long time now as me being somehow knowledgeable about all this. But I think the jig is finally up. Anyway, so go ahead, Father.
We'll see. The goal is, I think, we make these hard enough. And here's the other thing. Since this is not an easy game and I've made it harder getting rid of the multiple choice, I think it's only fair you get a chance to stump me as well.
All right.
So if you've got quotes prepared for me, that's great. the idea is, for the final point, instead of playing against each other, we're trying to survive the Uruk-hai together. So I'll ask you 3 questions. You'll ask me 2 questions. And then if we together answer more than 3 correctly, then we survive. And if not, well, then it's off to Isengard for both of us.
All right.
So here we go. The category today is forgotten lore. So the first quote.
Wait. Okay, go ahead.
All right. Men once dwelt here ages ago, but none remain now.
I would only have guesses and guesses as to the context. I am going to.
Shall I
So
give it
what this-
again?
No. Because what I'm first thinking of is that this. If I had to say where it was, I would say it is from The Hobbit. Am I right there? No? Because I was thinking it was when they were traveling and seeing the castles, the ruined castles as they traveled. But I
You
was
were on
going
the
to,
right track.
Oh, was all right. Well, then the other thing I was thinking of, but I was a bit skeptical, is this when the ring goes south?
So who do you think
I'm
is
thinking
speaking?
it's Gandalf who said this.
So that's incorrect.
Okay.
It's Aragorn, just a little bit, but very close to that. So it's Aragorn as they're approaching Weathertop, as opposed to Gandalf as they're coming into Holland. Frodo guesses that they're close to the trolls, and he wonders if they'll pass by the spot. He asks, "Who lives in this land, and who built these towers? Is it troll country?" "No," said Strider. "Trolls do not build. No one lives in this land. Men once dwelt here ages ago, but none remain now." So, but you were close to the right track. So that's one down. Your turn to ask me one.
All right. A Balrog is come.
So I feel like this is easy, but I think that's suspicious. I think it's Legolas in Moria.
Yes, it is.
Right.
So I have asked this as a quiz question at Doxamut to have people really stumble over this. And it's because Gandalf is not the one who recognizes what it is. It's Legolas.
Right.
And even though Gandalf, right at the door, feels him on the other side of the door and realizes it's a force he's never faced, and he doesn't understand what it is. But Legolas does. Yes.
Right. Well, that was how I got it, because I thought that can't be... I thought that maybe I was supposed to say Gandalf, and he does it, and he says it elsewhere. But I remembered that Gandalf after that says, "A Balrog, now I understand." But it's Legolas. Okay.
Yes.
So between the two of us, we're
almost
got
there.
one right. All right. So your second quote. "Yet death maybe was better than what else might have befallen him."
Ooh. I'm going to have to go through a process of elimination here.
That's
so
fine.
Him, I take it as Boromir. Is that right? No? Say it one more time.
Yet death maybe was better than what else might have befallen him. I would give you the sentence before, but it would give it away.
Give it away. Wow. Is it all right, this will have to be my final. Is it Gandalf speaking of Saruman?
It's a good guess, but no.
Okay.
So I'll give the fuller, and I think you'll recognize it as soon as I say the larger context. This I will have as weregild for my father and my brother, he said, and therefore, whether we would or no, he took it to treasure it. But soon he was betrayed by it to his death, and so it is named in the north Isildur's bane. Yet death maybe was better than what else might have befallen him. So with the full quote, I'm guessing you've got it.
Yes, so this is going to be Aragorn then.
Well, no, it's Elrond.
It's Elrond. Yeah, because as soon as you're saying that, it's at the council.
Right.
Rehearsing everything. So he says it to Elrond at Mount Doom.
Well, Elrond says to the council about Isildur, yes. It was his bane, but death is probably better than what would have come after.
Yes. Okay.
Which I picked, even though it was hard, but I thought, well, this is at least related to our topic. So.
No, it is.
All right.
Yes. All right.
So, all right. Now you give me one.
All right. How strong and proud he is. Where is his harness? It should be rich and fair.
So I think this would be about Shadowfax. After they've met Gandalf. So it has to be Aragorn or Legolas or Gimli. I don't think Gimli would talk about a horse harness. And I want to say it's Legolas again, and you're giving me two Legolas quotes, but I think that's misdirection, so I'm going to guess Aragorn, and you tell me if I'm wrong.
You're wrong.
Okay.
So...
Is it Legolas?
No. Nor is it Gimli. It is the boy companion to Pippin at Minas Tirith when he has to go take care of Shadowfax. And he says,
right.
That's where he says, oh, what a magnificent steed, right? And so, yes.
That's some grade A misdirection there. Nicely done. All right. That means we've only got, hang on.
One.
Well, now we're doomed regardless,
we're
but we
doomed
can at
die.
least we can gain some dignity. All right.
All right.
Your third quote. I have heard both and I will not give judgment now.
I have heard both, and I will not give judgment now. The first thing that comes to mind, so I'm probably going to go with this.
All right.
Gimli and Legolas are arguing about the dwarves and the elves' past wrongs.
Mm.
Is this Gandalf who says this, interjecting that
Yes.
this is?
Yes.
I've always
You
found
got
this
it.
fascinating because I'm always wondering, what in the world exactly are they talking about? Are they talking all the way back about the Noglamir? And
Right.
yeah, is that what they're arguing about? Right. So
I was wondering the same, but so I'll give the broader context, but you got it exactly right. So,
Yeah.
It was not the fault of the dwarves that the friendship waned, said Gimli. I have not heard that it was the fault of the elves, said Legolas. I have heard both, said Gandalf, and I will not give judgment now. But I beg you two, Legolas and Gimli, at least be friends and help me. I need you both. So,
that's great. That is great.
very nice. So,
Yes.
no congratulations to us. It seems we've both gotten looted and half-eaten by the Uruk-hai. I suppose we didn't need our legs after all.
No.
Off to Isengard for us both, but at least we can continue to discuss as we go. So,
The what was it? The yes, but at least they didn't get the ring. We did feign.
at least they didn't get the ring.
Yes.
We don't have it. We can't give it. All right. So that's all we've got today. Thank you so very much, Cyril, for co-hosting the Amon Sûl podcast with me today. I cannot tell you how much of a pleasure it is to get to sit face-to-face with you, even over the technology that we were decrying at the beginning, and actually get to know you a little bit in person. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Father, it was my great, great pleasure and delight.
So next time on Amon Sûl, I will be joined by whoever answers my emails and agrees to host this next one first, because I've been asking a few people, and we'll be talking about Chapter 3, 3 is Company. I'm looking forward to that. You can send, meantime, your comments, questions, topic suggestions, or orcish ideas for their taking the hobbits to Isengard to me at amonsul@ancientfaith.com or by messaging us through the podcast Facebook page.
If you want more of this kind of thing, subscribe to Amon Sûl podcast on your favorite podcast app, and please rate and review. And look up the Amon Sûl podcast page on Facebook. Click the follow button. Most of all, though, share with your friends. And while you're at it, if you appreciate this or other Ancient Faith media, go to ancientfaith.com, support, and show some practical love.
And I'm going to go off script and say, please also make sure to go to Dr. Jenkins' website and make use of his excellent content, his 2 podcasts that I'm aware of, like Through the Past and Path to the Academy. Did I get that right?
Yes. And I will say one more shameless plug.
And what is your Luke's Christie website? What is that now?
lukeschristie.co. I have a course on there on the history of atheism. I hope to finish before Christmas break my course on the Byzantine Empire. It's becoming a bit unwieldy. I kind of like Tolkien in his book. It just keeps growing the more I use that. I also have to say, in shameless plug time, my most recent book is called A Perilous Realm, right? Confronting Dragons, Angels, and Saints in the Ordering of the Soul. Available at an Amazon link near you.
And that book is why I asked you to be the guest host on this one.
Okay.
So thank you. Anyway, we've been around since 2019, and despite our complete failure at doing show notes here at the end, you can find our full back catalog of episodes by going to tolkienpodcast.com or just, subscribing on your podcast app. The Amon Sûl podcast theme music is Hidden Past, and the closing theme is Celtic Impulse, both by Kevin MacLeod, whose music you can find at incompetech.com.
Our podcast cover art was created by Samuel Hebel, and our audio producer, professional eavesdropper, is Charlotte Martin, and our video editor, volunteer technician, is Simon Nelson.
And special thanks go to the Amon Sûl Facebook page or Facebook group rather, for conversation and inspiration. I am your host, Father Anthony Cook, and even though Bobby Maddox wonders whether this podcast's hosts might not benefit from an earthquake or an invasion of dragons every time he hears me say it, this has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.